Meeting number 25 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to the order of reference of February 3rd, 2021, the committee is meeting to study Bill C-208, an act to amend the Income Tax Act, transfer of small business or family farm or fishing corporations. Today's meeting is taking place in the hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25, 2021, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. And I'd like to remind members to turn off their mics when they're not speaking. So with that, before we go to witnesses, Mr. Kelly, you have a quick point of order.
Really briefly, and I'd maybe even hope to deal with it informally if we could have ahead of time. And I know we're behind now, and so this may not be possible, but I had hoped that if we could get the opening statements, brief opening statements in both panels, and a full round of questions with some time to spare, that we might get to clause by clause today, and thus be able to return this bill more quickly to the chamber. I'll leave it with you, Mr. Chair, but that would be what I suggest we do for just in the name of expediency on this bill.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure if. Okay. I'll try and talk to the clerk while we're meeting to see if it's possible to do that. I don't know if the logistics are together to do it, but I'll communicate with the clerk while the meeting's going on. Okay. With that, then we will turn to the first panel of witnesses. First up, we have the Scott Ross, Assistant Executive Director with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. Scott, the floor is yours. And if you could hold it to about 5 minutes, be dandy.
I'll do my best. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Scott Ross, and I'm the Assistant Executive Director of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, Canada's largest general farm organization, representing nearly 200,000 Canadian farm families from coast to coast to coast. I'd like to start by thanking the committee for inviting farm organizations to speak on Bill C-208, as the continued facilitation of farm family transfers is an issue of critical importance to CFA and its members. Agriculture is a capital-intensive business, and effective succession planning is critically important, particularly for a sector that will transfer tens of billions of dollars in assets to the next generation in this decade alone. It's undeniable that COVID-19 has fundamentally affected Canada and the world's economic outlook. And while Canadian agriculture is certainly not immune to those effects, the sector is uniquely well positioned to drive Canada's economic recovery. Yet the average age of Canadian farmers now exceeds 55 years of age, and the opportunities these businesses face will carry into the next generation. As a sector where the vast majority of businesses remain family-owned, maintaining the financial health of these businesses across generations is critical. This is in the interests of all Canadians, as studies show that family farming encourages sustainable growth, environmental stewardship, and increased spending within one's local community, not to mention its contributions to the social fabric of rural Canada. With respect to Bill C-208, I would begin by noting that I'm not a tax expert. However, in 2012, I convened and supported a taxation committee at CFA comprised of tax practitioners and farm leaders from across Canada, with a mandate to identify and review the most critical tax-related issues facing Canadian farmers. Section 84.1 of the Income Tax Act and the disincentive it presents to family farm transfers, a primary focus of the proposed amendments under Bill C-208, was promptly identified as a priority by this committee and has been a focus of the CFA ever since. This was reiterated just 2 weeks ago when farm leaders from across Canada passed a resolution at the CFA's annual general meeting imploring the federal government and members of parliament to support and actively contribute to the passage of Bill C-208 before the next federal election as a priority for Canadian farmers. Simply put, the current wording of the Income Tax Act penalizes a farmer if they choose to transfer the farm business to a family member as opposed to an anonymous third party. As a result, when a retiring farmer sells their businesses to their children, they face the prospect of paying a lot more in taxes than if they were to sell to a stranger. This difference in treatment can amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars. This amounts to reduced productivity, increased financial risk, and lost opportunities at a time where the sector holds such immense growth potential. There are over 43,000 family farm corporations across Canada, operating on more than 50 million acres of land. The transfer of each one of these businesses, were they to stay in the family, would be disadvantaged and face this undue tax burden. CFA supports Bill C-208 because it essentially ensures that real family farm transfers can access the same capital gains treatment as those businesses selling to an unrelated party, rather than treating the difference as a dividend that's taxed at a higher rate and cannot access the lifetime capital gains exemption. CFA also supports the safeguards in Bill C-208 to prevent surplus stripping by assuring that a real transaction has taken place. For example, if the shares are sold by the child within 5 years of acquiring them, the transaction is deemed to involve dividends and taxes will be charged retroactively. We are not seeking an exemption or preferential treatment for family farms, but instead looking to ensure the Income Tax Act recognizes real intergenerational farm transfers and treats them accordingly. In conclusion, I'd like to thank the committee for its time and reiterate that the CFA seeks your support for Bill C-208 as it addresses an undue tax disincentive to the continued vibrancy of family farming in Canada. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ross. Turning then to the Fédération de la Relève Agricole du Québec, Julie Bissonnette, President, and Philippe Page, General Director. Ms. Bissonnette.
Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, and Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having invited us to share our comments before your committee regarding the farm transfers. My name is Julie Bissonnette. I'm a dairy producer. I'm also a member of the Fédération de la Relève Agricole du Québec. With me is our General Director, Mr. Philippe Page, who grew up on a hog farm in Saint-Camille. Before I get to the crux of the subject, I'd like to say a few words about organization. FRAC is an organization that brings together young people from 16 to 39 years of age who all work in agriculture, and they represent more than 1,700 volunteer members in Quebec. We're also affiliated with the UPA. Our mission is to defend the interests of the new generation and to improve the conditions of their operations, whether they're startups or already on farm. It's urgent to act to settle the tax inequities between related and non-related organizations for more than 15 years now. The new generation has been constantly denouncing this issue, and we hope that it will be solved once and for all. Although the bill addresses all small companies, we'd like to provide you with the point of view of young farmers in Quebec. What we're trying to solve is that currently it's more complicated to sell to your children than somebody from outside of the family. We also want to make you aware of the fact that several young people in Canada are seeing their dreams evaporate because of these poorly adapted tax rules. Right now there are two options. Either the transferor sells his company to the children and will have to pay a great deal of taxes, or he sells to an outside person and he benefits due to the current tax law. The farmer will pay more taxes if he sells his children to his company to his children rather than sending it to a related transfers. So it's normal to choose the most beneficial situation. After all, often this farm is often the fruit of an entire life's labor. Unfortunately, the current legislation forces them to make a decision between keeping the company in the family or having a better retirement. So Bill C-208 suggests amending the law to obtain the same exemptions as a third party, and we strongly support this because it once and for all settles the issue. Bill C-208 is important for successions because we believe that it will foster the transfer between related parties and will solve these problems of inequity and will also maintain a strong agricultural sector. The numbers are telling. A family transfer has six times more likely to succeed compared to a transfer to an outside party. As well, 70% of business owners would like to see their businesses remain in their family. Once again, the related transfer is the preferred means of keeping the farm. Our tax system should support the entire new generation depart, regardless of what kind of access there is to the company, which currently doesn't exist. With an average age that moves closer to retirement right now, more farmers tomorrow will pass the businesses on. And it's beyond tax equity. It's about maintaining farm development throughout Canada to ensure that we can work in a healthy fashion. And many young people ask me about this and telling me that their parents are aging or now close to retirement. An amendment to the Income Tax Act would change their lives. It is therefore imperative that action be taken immediately because there will be many farm transfers in the next few years. In agriculture, we're very excited about our jobs. We're very proud. So imagine how proud we are and how grateful we are when a farm transfer is successful. However, losing a farm in a company that is the disappearance of a dream or gives rise to failure is terrible. So we encourage the MPs of the government and the opposition to work hand in hand, not only to settle this tax inequality, but also to make the necessary corrections to the good governance of the Tax Act. In closing, once again, we would like to reiterate our support vis-à-vis this bill, as we have supported all of their previous versions in the past 2 years. To legislate to make related transfer more equitable is supported by a great consensus in all sectors. It is normal that there be hindrances in the transfer of a company. It is a long, complicated process, and there will be hindrances. But why add an additional hurdle when it comes to transferring a farm to a child? Do we really want this transfer to be undermined because an inequity in the law? We hope that we will finally be heard, and I thank you very much for listening to us.
Thank you very much. Turning then to the Grain Growers of Canada, Chair Andre Harp and Brendan Leslie, Manager. Go ahead, Andre, I believe.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, honorable members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you today. My name is Andre Harp, and I am the chair of the Grain Growers of Canada. Grain Growers is the national voice for Canada's 65,000 grain, pulse, and oilseed farmers across all of Canada. I farm in the Peace region of northern Alberta, and when we finish harvest this fall, we will become a century farm, which means representing 100 years of our family farming this land. We grow malt barley, canola is our mainstay, and we rotate other crops in year to year. My father incorporated this farm in 1972 before I took over from the farm from him in the 1980s. Now, like many other farmers my age across the country, I'm going to look at the future of my farm. Succession planning is a challenge. It's expensive and must be done right. I'm also the proud father of 3 girls, and they all love the farm. And I can't say for certain just yet, but I believe they are all interested in possibly taking over this farm one day. That decision is ultimately will be up to them, but I would love to keep this farm in my family for another 100 years. Beyond that, I would be happy to see our sector benefit from fresh, new ideas for farming from young women like them. There's an old saying that many farmers are cash poor and asset rich. While the debt owed on my assets may not jive with the word rich, the reality is that my farm is my retirement. The equity I have built through the years of hard work is my RRSP, it's my pension. The structure of cash flows for a farm necessitates returning profit back into the operations to pay down debt, purchase inputs, and prepare for the following growing season. When I sell my farm to my daughters or somebody else, that's when I finally see the results of the years of hard work. Most business owners, farmers or otherwise, are in the same position, and we knew that going in. But I scratch my head to understand why I would, for even 1 second, have to consider whether or not I should sacrifice any part of my retirement in order to pass my farm on to my children. I should not have to weigh the decision of lower quality. I should not have to weigh the decision of a lower quality of life in retirement due to significantly higher taxes to keep the farm in my family, or to maximize my retirement by selling it to a third-party buyer. This isn't about special treatment. It's about fairness. I've heard it mentioned that because we are incorporated, it must mean that we are not a family farm. This couldn't be further from the truth. My farm is actually part of 97% of farms in Canada that are family farms. And in my view, Bill C-208 would help it stay that way. My daughters choose to take over the farm, hopefully start families and stay on the land. It is also good for our local communities, and which makes it good for Canada. The sustainability of our rural communities is vital, and leveling the playing field is so that it is advantageous to sell to a family member would help keep people on the land. It'll also help keep our schools, sports teams, and communities alive. There have been questions surrounding whether this bill would create tax loopholes that could be taken advantage of. And I know the next panel will include many tax experts, so I will defer to them I will defer to them on the safeguards built into this legislation. What I do know is that farmers often have to make decisions based on a risk-benefit analysis every day, just as you do in your roles. I would suggest that the risk of being prevalent amongst farms as part of their succession plan compared to the benefits for family farms and rural communities is clear. In closing, the Grain Growers of Canada are strongly in favor of this legislation, and we encourage parliamentarians to pass it into law in an expedited manner to ensure tax fairness for those currently deliberating this issue today. Not all farms are going to be transferred to the next generation, but for any of those that have the chance, Bill C-208 will go a long way to ensuring that farmers don't have to choose between keeping the farm in the family and getting the most out of retirement. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Hello, General President, and Mark St. Roche, Accounting and Taxation Coordinator. Mr. Curlo?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, my name is Marcel Greneau. I'm the President General of the UPA. With me is Mr. Mark St. Roch. He's a tax expert who specialized in the agricultural sector. If you have more specific questions later, I invite you to ask these to Mr. Mark. The agricultural and agro-food sector is a major economic engine. It is responsible for revenues of more than $120 billion per year and exports. It is the backbone of many rural regions. It is also vital for food safety in Canada. Currently, 98% of the farms in the country belong to farmers who are the operator owners. This model is the pride of Canada. And this family structure fosters sustainable growth, good environmental management, and reinvestment in the local economy. However, the legal structure of these companies has evolved over the past few years. According to the 2016 census, the percentage of incorporated farms almost doubled in 20 years, rising from 12 to 25%. Despite a drop of roughly 83,000 farms, the number of corporations in Canada continues to grow from 32,700 to 48,600. This is also there's also the phenomenon of aging in the farm community. The average age of farmers is around 55. That is 7.5 years more than in 1991. The increase in the value of assets and therefore debts also involves that we have the involvement of corporations, and it is there to foster the financing of investments because the tax rate for corporations make it possible to borrow to pay capital back more quickly. According to Canada Bank of Development, a study done in 2017, 40% of small companies will be transferred or sold by the end of 2022 because the owners will retire. Approximately $15 billion of agricultural assets will change hands in the next 10 years. However, the Canadian tax system is unfair when it comes to family transfer of companies. The current regulation is so that it is often far more expensive to sell one's farm to a member of the family rather than a non-related person. By penalizing farmers who want to retire and those who want to take over, these rules undermine the financial health of family farms in Canada. Section 84.1 of the Income Tax Act provides that if, to facilitate the financing of a company's sale, somebody sells their shares to another corporation with whom he has a relation, a link, the capital gains that would be generated due to the sale would be seen as a taxable dividend. The seller, therefore, cannot use that capital gains deduction for eligible agricultural assets. This is unfair because in this case, this is a company that would be, if you were controlled by a third party without a relation, the seller would achieve a capital gains that might be tax exempt. In this gain of $500,000, that might represent up to $225,000 in additional tax due, whereas this amount should not be taxable. To enable family businesses to facilitate the sale of their shares to a related persons and the transfer to benefit from the capital gains deduction, the government of Quebec has amended its income tax law to provide for an exemption that is consistent with Section 84.1 of the Federal Act. The Canadian government should build on this example. The Canadian Income Tax Act in Canada has not kept pace with demographic change at the UPA. Bill C-28 will contribute in equalizing the conditions by eliminating major costs that benefit those owners who would like to sell their companies or their farms to members of their family. Sometimes following a dispute, the owners of a multifamily farm want to continue running the company on their side. Section 55 of the Income Tax Act provides for a mechanism which makes it possible to share the assets of an incorporated company free of tax between the shareholders as long as this distribution respects the proportions of the property. However, it is impossible to share these assets because they cannot be separated out. For example, in agricultural field, to see the fair sharing of the value of the assets from somebody who's leaving, one needs to have a higher amount of money. In this case, sharing the assets of a company, if it is unbalanced, it might be taxable under the form of a non-exempt capital gain. However, when the transfer is done between related persons, this issue does not apply, and that amount of money might not be taxable. However, Section 55 stipulates that for the purposes of this act, brothers and sisters are deemed not to have a relation between them. However, when we know that company separations take place more often between siblings, Section 55 penalizes the settling of the dispute because the share of these assets cannot be done proportionally when tax is due, which undermines the viability of each one of the companies. For UPA, the Bill C-28, that is to exclude the application of Section 55 to transactions between siblings, would also be appropriate in the case where these amounts of money and other assets transferred to a shareholder who were leaving the company would be reinvested in the company. In this manner, the agriculture investments will be maintained even though they are distributed to separate companies. In closing, farms can continue to grow. They often support more than a single household and are often more and more often incorporated for tax reasons or for tax planning reasons. And in this healthy environment, a good tax planning is required. So this is key if we want to maintain the health of the sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all the witnesses. Our question lineup starts with Mr. Falk, then Mr. Fraser, then Ms. St. Marie, and Mr. Julian. If he's back, we may have to delay him. So we'll go to questions right now, and I'll go to your point following the questions to these witnesses, Mr. Kelly. So we'll start with Mr. Clerk. Can we get an extra half hour, do you know, so that we can keep these witnesses a little longer?
I have not had an answer from the services yet. They're looking into it.
Okay, because we're late starting. Okay, Mr. Falk, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses who presented today and for helping Canadians better understand the bill that's before us here today. I think it's an important bill, and it's something that I certainly support. I'd like to ask the grain growers of Canada a few questions. I understand that I think from Mr. Harp's intervention that 97% of Canadian farms are family owned and operated. That's a remarkable figure, and I think that's something worth celebrating. But farm families face a variety of challenges when it comes to succeeding in their operations. And can you explain to the committee some of these challenges and describe how Bill C-208 can help keep businesses under family ownership?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I think one of the issues with the farming in this day, it's become, and not that it always has been, but it's become even more a complicated business. But quite often, because of the lack of, and I'll say, even having fine qualified labor, just because of the technologies, I rely on my family to be able to run the equipment that we can, just for the fact the technology in tractors and combines right now, and even the cost and the expense of it, we can no longer just pull somebody off the street. It's a huge training process, and we are relying more and more on our farm and our farm families. But I think it gets back to we need to. We're using our children as qualified labor, but the thing is, right now, what we're looking for is to build a pass on the farm, and that's the tough part about it.
Okay, thank you. And if your colleague, Mr. Leslie, wants to respond, I'm fine with that as well. So, I mean, family farms, as an ownership group, often it's mom and dad that own the farm, and they want to distribute it to the siblings. What are some of the dynamics that come into play when considering an intergenerational farm transfer?
So quite often, and I'll use my farm as an example. When I took over from my farm, I had two sisters. So basically, it gets back to how many of your children are going to want to farm, and basically, quite often, it may be all, and it just might be one. In my case, it was only myself that had an interest in the farm. So basically, not only do we have to look at basically one child taking over the farm, but basically, how do the other children get treated? So we have issues like that. So it's equality. And the thing is, it gets back to it's also the ability to be able to manage a farm also. So it's just not everybody can farm all. Brandon, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Falk. I would say that that's a good question in of itself, and that builds on some of the problems as to why this bill is so relevant. There are so many factors at play when it comes to succession planning and that continuation of the family farm already that I think it's fair to say it's kind of an undue additional burden to have the consideration of whether or not you should take an additional loss on taxes just to do that. There's already enough considerations within the mix that I think this is a point of fairness that is very timely as this question is expanding as referenced earlier by the number of folks that are of an age that this is going to be something that is happening in the next 10 years. So it's a very timely piece of legislation in that sense.
Very good, thank you. And so what is the risk of losing family farms in Canada if we don't remove the barrier of intergenerational transfers from a tax perspective?
Well, I think the biggest issue is what we're looking at too is, as I alluded to in my remarks, is basically corporate farms. And basically what we'll be looking at if we don't make it fair or equitable to pass your farm on to the children, all of a sudden you do get big farms, and all of a sudden you do get real corporations running corporate farms. And it's basically not that, basically when we talk about care for the environment, we talk about climate change. A family farm looks after what we need to look after because we want to pass that land on. Where what I would call a real corporate farm, I don't think they have the same incentive.
Mr. Chair, I got about a minute left yet.
Minute and a half.
Okay, thank you. I think you've identified one of the problems with the big corporate farms. They're looking at returns and not always necessarily being good stewards of the land. Not that they're all like that, and I don't want to lump them all into one sum, but family farmers know that they need to protect the land and the resources that are available to them for future generations. And I think they've got their eye on that part of the equation much more so than a big corporation sees that they're looking to generate profits for multiple shareholders. So, you know what, you indicated in your intervention that your retirement plan is in your RRSP and the equity that you have in your farm. So when you're going to consider selling your farm to one of your daughters, you're going to look at what's going to maximize your retirement return. And if you sell it to the neighbor, he's going to provide you with probably the same amount of money that your daughters would feel it would be worth, except you're going to end up paying a bigger tax bill if you sell it to your daughters, unless we can pass this important piece of legislation. Have I accurately identified that concern?
Yep, that's very correct.
Okay, and so do you see, from what you're aware of in this legislation, do you see any hurdles in the legislation that would prevent a problem of a family farm transition?
No, actually, having a look at the bill, I think it's good the way it is written. Of course, the devil's always in the details, but right now it looks good, and we support it.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Falk. Turning to Mr. Fraser, and I might remind you, Mr. Groulet, they claim your mic is rubbing on your suit jacket, so if you held it up a little, if you get some questions, just hold it up so the interpreters don't have that kind of a problem. Okay, Mr. Fraser.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our... sorry, I think we were both speaking at the time.
Go ahead, Sean, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much to our guests for joining us today. I really appreciate your insights on this. And let me just start by saying that I do hope to find a fix to ensure that we can fairly pass on farming operations and frankly certain other kinds of businesses to the next generation. I've got a couple concerns around Bill C-208. I'm interested in learning more about both some of the things it doesn't do and some of the things that it might do that we don't want. But I will acknowledge that there's, and it could accomplish the facilitation of intergenerational transfers, which I think is a good thing. So my primary concern right now, and it really dovetails from the conversation about corporate farms versus family farms, although I deal with it at home, even though I do have a strong agricultural presence for Nova Scotia in my riding, it comes up more often in the terms of the commercial fishery. The same issue is I can't tell you how important this is because the rural communities that sort of dot the coastline that I represent are driven really by the lobster fishery. One of the troubling issues that we have been trying to deal with over the past number of years deals with controlling agreements. And in order to protect the inshore fishery, what usually happens is the owner of the license will fish under that license. There becomes a problem when certain larger corporate interests become the legal owner of a fishing vessel and associated licenses, because they sometimes would be tempted to lease out the ability to fish on that license, which has the risk of pulling the economic benefit from the rural communities like the ones I represent to the headquarters of the corporate entity that owns those licenses. One of the fears I have is that it could be an unintended consequence of Bill C-208 is that it would encourage the adoption of corporate entities to own fishing vessels and licenses that would exacerbate this trend towards pulling the economic benefits out of communities. The same fear that you've expressed. And I know right now, if you sell a business to a child personally, rather than to a corporation owned by that child, you could benefit, for example, from the lifetime's capital gains exemption. I'm curious for those unincorporated farms or fishing businesses, or frankly, other businesses, do you think there are things we can do that would facilitate the transfer without putting at risk the controlling agreement circumstance? In a farming context, it would be like if a major grocer perhaps became the legal owner of the farm rather than the person who's farmed it for generations. So if you have insight on unincorporated businesses and how we can make that simpler, I'd be very interested.
Who wants to take that? Go ahead. Mr. St. Roche.
Oui, en fait.
Yes, The problem lies more in the financing of transactions rather than being an issue of claiming the capital gains deduction in the case of companies that are held personally. For instance, if a child would like to acquire the assets of his parent that he holds personally, he can finance that transaction and essentially pay the debt from the revenues realized thanks to the company. And the interest on this debt can then be deducted from the taxes. It's really the ability to pay back by companies that represents more of an issue. If the parent were to decide to sell all of the assets, that is one after the other, he would realize a great deal more than if he were to sell the company to the child. Because as we know, and I think Mr. Harp said this, that it's less beneficial and you make less when you operate it than the actual value of the assets that can be resold. And often the family and the parents will sell their company at a fraction of the cost to enable the children to, first of all, have some capital and to also enable them to live from the farm. So that really is the dilemma. The bill, C-208, strictly focus on the sale of incorporated companies. And there arises the problem. That is an outside person who would like to purchase the seller's shares is going to create a company, and the company that has been thus created will then therefore buy the shares from the seller. This corporation, that is the buyer, will then obtain funding, takes the money, pays the seller, and the company that will have been created, well, that is the owner of the share, it becomes the owner of the shares. And then you bring together those two companies to pay back the debt through the farm's operations, if it is a farm. So an outside person can do that. They can take a company, buy the shares of the seller, bring together that company with the company he's just bought, and then to finance the debt payback thanks to the operations of the company that he just purchased. Whereas if it is a child that would like to deploy that same strategy, that is to create a company, to buy the parents' shares, and it wants to bring together both entities to pay back the debt using the operations, in that case, the transaction is no longer deemed as being a capital gain sale. That might be exempt. But it is deemed as a taxable dividend for the parent. So if we agree, let's say you want to buy $500,000 of the parent's shares through the company to finance it, then the parent will end up having to pay $225,000 in taxes on a taxable dividend. Whereas if he had sold to the company held by an outside person, there would be a capital gain for which he could have taken a capital gain deduction and pay zero tax. And that is where the issue lies for Section 44.1.
Thank you. So I'm actually, Wayne, do I have, or Mr. Chair, do I have any time remaining, or has that been?
No, you don't actually.
Well, I'll save it for the next round of witnesses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll go to Mr. St. Marie. We will extend this panel for about 15 minutes because I know everybody's feeling rushed, and we can go till 6:30 Ottawa time. We got that authority. Mr. St. Marie, 6 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur Easter. Alors,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of the presenters. They have been very interesting, very well received. I'm worried. When a minority government, and we do know that this bill has been presented by Mr. McGuire from the Conservative Party. before the last election. This was brought by Mr. Guy Caron from the NDP, from Mr. Caron from the Bloc. And if you go further back, from the Liberals, Emmanuel Dubois had also presented it. So I'm surprised that it still doesn't exist. It should have been there for a long time. And now we find ourselves in a position where I expect this bill to pass, but there seems to be some reluctance in the Liberal Party, specifically on the government side, specifically with the budget that's been announced for April. And there are rumors around about a possible election this spring. If the government does not have the intent to implement this, it's possible that all of the work that we're conducting here will disappear. And we don't know when everything will resume. So, Ms. Bissonnette and Mr. Groslo, or Mr. Saint-Roch, I'd like to hear you tell us what your arguments are to convince the Liberal Party, that is the government. As Mr. Fraser indicated, there are worries. We fear that this bill will be used to enable companies to pocket money. So I'd like to understand what your arguments are to convince them to enforce this prior to the next election. Thank you.
Okay, Madame.
Ms. Bissonnette and Mr. Groslo, if that is amenable to you. Well, I'll turn it over to Marcel. Well, the Quebec government has corrected the situation in its tax system without it becoming a loophole for any financial maneuverings that would aim at bypassing the legislation. It is possible to achieve this, and it is beneficial. In fact, it is not an additional advantage that you're giving to family farms. You're simply reestablishing fairness in transactions between related parties compared to a transaction between non-related parties. All the political parties, one after the other, when they were in opposition, supported a similar bill. So there is no reason not to agree to or to move forward with this bill. Again, the devil is always in the detail. But there are means of establishing firewalls to prevent people who want to use tax strategies to bypass tax legislation to not be able to do this. If you have the same conditions between related and non-related parties, it's absolutely possible, and it has been done by the government of Quebec in its legislation. So I invite you to use that as an inspiration to perhaps look at the Quebec tax system and to see how they have been able to agree on correcting the situation. It is possible. And allow me to add this. What we're in favor of is that by making the interfamily transactions more complicated, what we're actually seeing is that large corporations, whether it be here, and it was in fact the case in Quebec and Canada, you have major investors, major funds who have tax experts who work only on these fiscal arrangements. And they go see farm families and they explain to them, if we, for example, this is what they say, if we buy the farm from you, you're going to achieve more thanks to this transaction, and then we'll give this back to the children. So currently this is being triggered. That is to deprive the next generations from owning the farm. If you do not own your soil, you can't develop a long-term companies, you can't invest in animals. It's not the same interest because it no longer belongs to us. The land is no longer ours. And we're creating a generation of renters of land rather than owners. In fact, we should foster family transactions. Thank you. And would the Relève Agricole like to add something? Yes, certainly, if I may add. Mr. Sainte-Marie, at the outset you said it. You said that each political party represented here already had presented this bill in the past. And criteria has followed certain criteria in its legislation to avoid abuse. In fact, here in 2017, we saw similar measures taking place when Mr. Caron presented the bill, and this was followed by Mr. Duval. The costs are already set. The studies have already been conducted. So I think we're ready to move on to version 4th of this bill. I think each of the parties is ready to move on with this. And if I may intervene, beyond all of this, young people ask me every time when a bill is tabled what it is, and we realize that certain farm transfers are not taking place because of the current laws. I think we really need to settle this. Already a farm transfer is difficult. There's also the human side to it. And if, in addition, this tax legislation puts more spokes in the wheel, it is not going to help us. And if we can settle that this year, I think many, many people would welcome this, and we're very eager to move on to something else. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Gabriel, we're going to leave you till the next 2.5 minutes. Then is Mr. Julian, you're back. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much. Thank you as well to our witnesses for appearing before the committee today. This is greatly appreciated. We appreciate your being here, and we certainly hope that you and your families continue to do well throughout this pandemic. But my questions first are addressed to Ms. Bissonnette and Mr. Grelot. I'd like to look into your crystal ball, if you will, for a moment, because we're speaking about how important this bill is and how important it is also to eliminate the penalties for the transfer of family farms. And as you so well expressed, it was Mr. Guy Caron, the NDP MP, who tabled this bill. But in your crystal ball, let's look 15 years ahead in Quebec and in Canada. What would it look like without this bill? And within 15 years, what would it look like with this bill? And what are the differences? That is when it comes to transferring family farms and the foundations that exist in Quebec and in Canada. Ms. Bissonnette, please, if you could answer this to begin. Yes, please go ahead. Obviously, passing this kind of bill will have a direct impact on farm transfers. Ms. Bissonnette mentioned it. A company transfer doesn't take place in a month. It's a process that takes several years. There are issues. Sometimes you have to water your wine a little bit to achieve an acceptable result for all parties. And when the tax system, in addition, penalizes family transfer, obviously, families will find it easier to dismantle the farm to sell to a neighbor and to, in fact, make it bigger at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, we're going to lose an absolute number of farms. And for our rural communities in Quebec as well as in Canada, we will have fewer family companies. We have fewer people who consume local products and live from this. So I think within the next 10 to 15 years, it is clear that if this unfairness is not corrected, those farm companies that are incorporated, well, won't see that much of a change. Mr. Grillo, during the presentation, we indicated that 40% of small companies that is, family companies are transferred or will be transferred the next 4 years. As well, the age of the owners indicate that shortly they'll be transferred. That's 50 billion in total. Usually as part of a transfer from a farm to the next generation, the tax savings that can be achieved by the transferor are shared between those who purchase and those who transfer. Those who acquire and those who transfer, rather. So this could be a benefit for the family, something that they can reinvest elsewhere. They can invest in equipment, they can hire labor. But this transaction, if it is facilitated, because it would be rendered equitable from a tax standpoint, would enable the company to start off on a better footing, to grow. And it would allow the transferor as well to retire and to have a better retirement. So it really is important. And it's difficult to put a number to see how many companies would be transferred or not transferred in absolute terms. But I think it is your responsibilities as Member of Parliament to facilitate within Canada tax legislation intergenerational transfers, because we also in Canada wish to develop a generation of entrepreneurs. The Canadian economy works thanks to small and medium-sized companies. It is those small and medium-sized businesses that create the greatest amount of jobs in Canada, especially in the rural communities. So we need to help these small companies. As well, agricultural assets are increasingly expensive. The value of equipment, etc. So if you wish to foster the operation of these companies, the tax legislation fosters incorporation currently, because that is what allows you to better plan and manage your companies. It's when they're incorporated. But then when it comes time to transfer these, the law penalizes those who are incorporated. So in a sense, there's an incoherence in the legislation between what it offers in terms of tools and compared to what it then supports when the time comes to transfer those companies. And most companies, the small, medium-sized companies, are first transferred to their families, because either these are people who have built the companies. So in my mind, it is really vital, and this is vital, and it is the role of parliamentarians to correct this unfairness. Thank you very much.
Very, very quickly, Peter, if you can hold it to 30 seconds, or do you want to go to your second? Could we leave your time till your next 2.5 minutes and give you 3? We'll go to Ms. Jansen, followed by Ms. Koutrakis, 5-minute round.
Yes, thank you. As a former farmer, although you never stop being a farmer myself, I do believe that this family farm succession is one of the most pressing issues in the agriculture industry today. I know there's real people behind these things. I know for myself, I had 5 kids. My husband and I had 5 kids, and they literally grow from the ground up, learning the farm, learning how it works. I know my son was 4 years old once, and a sales guy comes to the greenhouse and he says to the sales guy, "What's all that junk in the back of your truck?" And the sales guy's like, "Oh man, I know this is going to be a tough sale." So these kids, they learn this. This is part of who they are. And I know my son has now taken over the business, which is phenomenal. And he's very involved in the community. Recently, they had a big gala in there for the Firemen's Federation, or our local firemen. They did a big gala for the hospital. That was a fundraiser. I know even Elections Canada has talked to him about using one of the greenhouses for a polling station. So we must be coming to an election pretty soon. But so my concern is the way that there's no level playing field for parents like ourselves to pass this on to our kids. I'm wondering if you could speak to perhaps Mr. Brandon Leslie, the impact that selling to foreigners has on our communities. What happens in a community when the farm leaves the family?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And no, I think it's obviously a very good concern, and our chair Andre outlined it. I should say that according to the last census, that number is still relatively low. But I think that's kind of the point of this legislation is we want to get ahead of that potential curve. As farms by necessity often have to become larger, we don't want to have any further impediments at play when it comes to that ability to pass down the family farm. So, I mean, anybody that lives in a rural community knows the value of any small business, whether it be farming or otherwise, when it comes to the contributions to the local stores, the donations to the local events, the volunteers, the local hockey tournaments. It really is part of the fabric of that way of life. And I think such a simple change as this that could help continue that vital aspect of rural economies across the country seems like a simple solution, and the risk of potential problems with it is certainly outweighed by the clear benefits.
Yes, and what we found was really saddening for us was that we were basically looked at as tax cheats, and that's why these rules were in place, because they didn't want us, taking assets and making them into like a tax loophole, and like the idea that a tractor or a pickup truck was a tax loophole, I found absolutely outrageous. How do we make sure that that farms do stay in the family without calling them tax cheats. Is this bill going to solve all of our problems? Mr. Leslie, or
Sure. Maybe I'll start and then hand it over to our chair, Andre. No, I mean this isn't the be all end all. This impacts about a quarter of farms and a growing number of are incorporated. So it doesn't impact every aspect, and there's a number of underlying issues as to why both the economics and the social aspects behind farms are changing. But maybe I'll pass over to Andre to see if he has any comments on how important that is and how it might be best addressed.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Brandon. And I think the big thing, and I think I talked about this isn't a cure. This is not going to solve all the problems. Number one, not every child wants to go farming or wants to continue with the greenhouse. So it's not going to stop all our issues. But I think probably the biggest thing is what it's going to do is going to make it equal. But the thing is, it gets, like I talked about before, is it's the old saying, we're cash poor, asset rich. And at the same time, not everybody is going to be able to afford to pass it on to their kids, depending on what their debt load is and everything, because at some point they actually may need all the cash they can get of what they've been growing with their farm.
Absolutely.
And that's where the issue is. And if you can, I've seen examples where you may get $250,000 more, say on a $2 million farm, you might get up to $250,000 more by selling it to your neighbor than your kid. Well, you might actually owe that money. Yeah. It's not so much do I make the choice of who I want to sell it to. Unfortunately, your silent partner, the bank, might not give you the choice.
Can I have one more quick question?
Yes, you can. Go ahead.
Thank you. So when a farmer has a child who is actually willing to take on the legacy of the family farm, you would think that we would be given a level playing field. So will this achieve that? Like you say, it's not easy to get them, but when you do, will this achieve what we're looking for?
So what I've read out of this bill, I think this will do it. This will work. It'll make life a lot easier. It gets back to the unfortunate thing, anytime we make a move financially, unfortunately, when it comes to the federal government, one of the first people we phone is our accountant to see what the tax laws are. So, but what I read of this bill, I think this will do it.
Okay, thank you both. Turning to Ms. Kotrakis, who will be followed by Mr. St. Marie. Annie?
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you as well to the witnesses for your presentations this afternoon on this fairly important issue. I'm going to be asking my questions, but they are addressed to all of our witnesses. I'd like to begin with this. Currently, are there means for an owner to pass the asset to the children without being subjected to the dividend tax rule? Yes, Mark, please go ahead. In the Income Tax Act currently, it is possible for a parent to give to a child assets, that is incorporated companies in this case. So it is possible to give these shares without tax being applicable to that transfer. And the child recoups these shares as if he or she had always been the owner. Of course, for the parent in this case, there is no counterpart. It's more of a donation. But yes, it can be done without paying tax in this particular case. And Mr. Saint-Roch, so as far as you're concerned, how many business owners choose this option when they sell their business? And how can we support or encourage more business owners to sell directly to members of their family? Well, what we usually see, and as I mentioned earlier, that is parents who would like to pass the farm on to their children. The savings they've achieved have always been reinvested into their company. As a general rule, when there is a transfer, they expect that there be a little bit of capital that comes back into the transaction to cover their needs. And I'm in a practice. I see a lot of different situations, and I can tell you that parents do not ask to obtain the market value of the company. What they want is to obtain a reasonable amount so that they can provide for their retirement. And often it's the amount that's selected in the transaction, and it is based on their ability to reimburse. That is the farm's ability to reimburse. You have these kinds of transactions, but they can account for only 30% of the total value of a company because it's only the only amount that they could reasonably obtain and that their children can pay them. But in the case before us, when it is an incorporated farm where the parent wants to transfer to their child, wants to transfer their farm, so we're trying to establish how much the parents need. If in addition to that they have to pay tax on that, the parents don't wish to pay it. So at the end of the day, the children, through using liquidities in the company, have to cover the taxes that the parents owe because Section 44.1 is there. But as Mr. Grelot says, this impacts the liquidities of the companies. It undermines the financial position of the businesses. They have to incur more debt, or they have to make payments to the parents to cover both the taxes as well as their parents' needs who are retiring. So at the end of the day, you're doubling the financial costs. Whereas if the parents were not buying, you would not have that problem. But in actual fact.
Quick question, Annie.
OK, ma dernière question. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Un parent.
My last question. Can a parent maintain the control of the shares that have been transferred as per the law? That's currently, yes, they can. If I may, Quebec has implemented criteria to avoid this situation, and it's easy to implement this to avoid that situation. That's exactly what I was about to say. Quebec has put in place a number of criteria. I'm sorry.
J'aimerais savoir.
Perhaps you could send an answer with these criteria in them to the committee so that we can review this here at the Finance Committee. We would be very grateful for that. Thank you.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing. If you could send that criteria to us right away, it'd be helpful. Turning then to Mr. St. Marie, followed by Mr. Julian. Only a couple and a half minutes, Gabriel.
Oui, merci, Wayne. Bon.
Thank you, Wayne. Well, let's hope that this bill come into force as soon as possible. So we'll see the concerns that have been raised. Perhaps a question for Ms. Bissonnette. I'm in the Joliette riding. We have a lot of farm communities in our riding. There are many cases that I've seen where there were transfers to children, as was explained here. The parents said, fine, we'll have a smaller retirement, otherwise it'll be expensive in taxes. But there were other cases where they simply sell to a third party. So I'd like to know this. What happens in the actual community? What's at issue without stating any names? If you could perhaps speak to that reality and in a more tangible manner. Thank you for that question. Well, first of all, the farm transfer is always a major step in the lives of the transferor and the person who receives it. You can get lots of information on this. Nevertheless, it's on a case-per-case basis. Each farm is different. As we already heard, some have debts, others have less. It's always different. And we always start off at different levels. In terms of the transferor, we've mentioned that it's all about their retirement. So all of these steps simply accumulate, and suddenly the transferor says that it's simply too much, and he just doesn't want to do this any longer. It's wonderful to have an energetic, dynamic new generation, but sometimes the transferor realizes that this is his life, his passion, it's his lifestyle, and he's arrived at the end, and everything has simply built up. And sometimes that alone is that it's simply too much, and the transferor decides that it's enough. And you can't allow that to happen. in Canada. To lose farm companies, we know that it's a great deal of work, and there are a lot of interested parties in the new generation. In some areas, there are fewer, but it is a whole way of living, and that's part of the region's vitality, of the economy of a region. So this bill would really solve a lot of things. It's something that is really been bothering us, and it will settle this. And that would certainly solve the human issue and the bureaucratic issue of a farm transfer. And we think that it would really remove a great deal of weight from the shoulders of agricultural producers. Do I have time for one more question, Mr. Chairman?
So we'll give you a very quick one, though, not a speech.
Très bien. Monsieur Groslot, j'ai été
Mr. Grillo, I was floored earlier when you said that the status quo currently is so that the purchase of lands is being concentrated in the hands of people who don't actually work the land. Could you speak to that a bit? Could you perhaps give us an overview of it and explain to us to what extent this bill could reduce this phenomenon? Well, in Quebec, we've seen that in the agricultural lands transfers, we do have data from the organization that protects lands transfer. We have municipal logs as well, as that there are more and more transfers of agricultural lands that are carried out by investors rather than by the owners. This means that more and more land is actually being concentrated in the hand of a few players. These are Quebec players, they're not foreigners, and they're interested in holding this land until they wait to see what they can do with it. But this is a worldwide phenomenon. It's not limited to Quebec. In Canada, in fact, in Saskatchewan, they passed laws to limit the sale of lands to investment funds or insurance funds. So it is a global issue, that is the acquisition of land by speculative funds. And currently, and it's enabled by the law.
We'll have to end it there. That is another, and it's a huge issue. Mr. Julian, you've got about 3 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Well, I'd like to come back to Mr. Ross and to the Grain Growers of Canada on the same question, looking into a crystal ball and seeing 15 years from now, if we have this legislation in place that stops the penalties for transferring family farms, and if we don't have this legislation in place, what do you perceive to be the difference? So I'll start with Mr. Ross.
Thank you for the question. I think many of the other witnesses have touched on elements of this, but I think we continue to see a rise in incorporation in farms for a variety of reasons involving everything from tax planning to succession planning and other elements of that. And while there is a small percentage of farms that are currently not family owned in Canada, we certainly appreciate the fact that family farming brings with it a whole suite of benefits for all of Canada, including the fact that was alluded to earlier, wherein the retiring generation tends to extract the value they need for retirement, but try to put the farm in the next generation's hand in the best financial health possible. And I think for us, that's a critical element of this discussion, is how do we situate the sector based in family farming as it is today for success into the next generation. I think there's a whole host of environmental and economic reasons why that's beneficial for all of Canada. So with these measures in place as they currently stand, we will continue to see pressure on family farms as they look to transfer into the next generation in what's already a very complicated process, having one more variable to contend with and pulling financial equity out of a sector that desperately needs it, as it is a very capital intensive industry.
Thank you for this. And I'll go to the Grain Growers of Canada.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, it's interesting. Mr. Ross alluded to it's a set of variables, or it's one variable, and I'd have to very much agree with that. And I think what this bill would do is take one of the variables out of it. But you know, and I think if I look 15 years from now, I would be very worried about putting the corporate into corporate farms. Like, unfortunately, the bigger the farms, the less the less you're part of the farm. And I guess it gets back to, and if I look at, you know, between climate change and the environment now, I think we need to keep family farms keep as many family farms in play as possible because they have a real connection, or we have a real connection to what we do to this earth.
So you would see a significant difference 15 years from now if this legislation is not adopted.
I'd be very wary. Yes, it's really tough, and but what I would see is bigger farms. Just for the fact is because it gets back to, and I've talked about it before, when it gets to a certain point, when you go to sell a farm, unfortunately you do have bills, you do have mortgages to pay off. So it could become become a real factor. And unfortunately, some of the bigger farms are getting much bigger.
Okay, we will have to end it there. We'll go to Mr. Kelly, followed by Mr. McLeod. Sorry, I didn't give you a heads up, Ben.
Oh, no problem, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to begin with just an observation. I know with our panel or our witnesses that they are all from agricultural stakeholder groups, but my riding is 100% urban. It's a city riding, but the issues really are no different with so many other types of small businesses, and so much of this just translates straight across the board to the family restaurant, the family small manufacturing operation, all kinds of family operations. And with that, I'll maybe turn to Mr. Harp, who spoke quite a bit about just the nature of being in business as a family and the extent to which one's entire life's financial plan toward a comfortable, secure retirement is tied up in the fortune of the business and the tying up of the family's capital in the business. A farmer or a restaurateur or a manufacturing operation proprietor or a fishing boat operator, isn't generally best advised to take money and profit from the business and invest it outside of the business. Sometimes it's just not a possibility, sometimes it's not prudent. So I'd like maybe, Mr. Harp, just coming from the point of view of a family business operator, the business being a farm, to give us this perspective on the extent to which the capital is always tied up in the asset, the business asset.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you make a wonderful point. Farming is not much different than owning a restaurant or owning a small manufacturing business. We're very much the same. It gets back to a small business is made generally from blood, sweat, and tears. And it gets back to we put our labor into whether you call it our child or whatever, but we're always trying to make something grow. And especially on a farm, that's exactly what we're trying to do. But at the same time, if you look at and this year is a perfect year to maybe talk about that a little bit. But if we talk about COVID and supply chain issues for agriculture, the cost of our inputs, our fertilizer, which we need to grow an efficient crop, the costs have doubled this year. The price of equipment due to and I'll throw in due to carbon taxes, due to cost of manufacturing, the cost of equipment has skyrocketed this year. So basically, it gets back to when you have a plans are one thing about, they always say plan A because you need more than one plan. But it gets back to it always seems like we're always having to put money back into the farm. And very rare is it a chance to have a few extra $100 where you can maybe try and invest it in something else. So it's always it's very capital intensive. We're always putting back into the farm, but it also gets back to, and I think that's what I said in my opening remarks, it's our RSP. This is our TFSA, however you want to say it. This is what we count on for when we decide to retire. And the thing about farming, and whether it's a restaurant or not, it's just very, very similar. We could decide to retire at 55 because of health issues, or some people decide to continue on the farm in their 80s. So it's all over the place, and it's very dependent, and that depends then how much money you actually need to retire. So, but
Right.
it's huge.
Yeah. And just one other point that I also want to make, or through witnesses see into the record. There have been criticisms of the whole idea of a corporate entity. We know what's been said in the past, and the accusations of tax cheating and that kind of thing. But is it not correct that, and I'll leave this to whichever witness might be best able to answer this, that often the decision for a business to operate through a corporation is driven by pressures that are not really their choice. It could be their bank, for example. In any type of commercial lending scenario, a bank will almost normally insist that the land or the building be held in a corporate entity, and often maybe even one separate than the operating entity. But they want both to be corporate structures. So this whole idea of these small businesses, family businesses forming corporations, is often not the choice of the business owner themselves.
I'll maybe speak real quickly, and hopefully somebody else can add to it. But I do know, if you look at the business world right now, and especially banks, basically they're very used to the corporate culture. So they get very uncomfortable, or they operate a lot easier when they're dealing with a corporation. Yeah. Whether it's a farm or a restaurant.
They actually won't lend to somebody. Yeah, well, only lend to one.
But that's exactly it. They won't.
And I think Mr. Grillo wants in as well. Mr. Grillo? Did you want in, Marcel?
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kelly. I'd like to respond to your question. First of all, the situation is somewhat different in the agricultural sector because of the value of the assets compared to the return one achieves on these assets. In agriculture, the rule says that you have to invest between $6 and $7 in order to generate $1 in revenue, whereas in other businesses, it's $1 for $1. And it is for these reasons that we have special tax rules for the sector, and specifically their capital gains exemptions, and they are higher when you invest in agricultural assets. And when you look at these, when there's a sale. The second point is this. To sell, we don't have to be incorporated or be a corporation. However, the law favors this kind of structure, this legal type of structure, because the corporate income tax law is less than, that is, the taxes there are less than for taxes for individuals. And this is why we're calling on corporations or companies to run a business. It is not a requirement by the banks. It's simply a matter of good management. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. McLeod, you'll get to wrap up this panel. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses. Very interesting discussion on a very concerning issue, and I'm in the same boat as Pat Kelly. I don't have a whole lot of farms in my riding, and so we do have some hobby farms, and we have some community gardens and things of that nature, but there's a number of questions that I have. I think I'll start first with Mr. Harp. He made a very good presentation, but there's some things that he said that I'm not clear on, and I maybe because of my lack of exposure to farming, I have these questions. But he mentioned that his farm was a corporate farm, but it's not a real corporate farm. So, I mean, I could understand the difference between an uncorporated farm and an incorporated farm. Maybe you could explain to me what he meant. I think his farm is considered a corporate farm, but it's not the same as a real corporate farm. Yeah. I didn't follow that.
So, sorry, I do apologize. So quite often, and yes, our farm was incorporated in 1972 when my father took over from my grandfather. Basically, so public perception, or what we feel public perception is, when they talk a corporate farm, we're talking basically a corporation with shareholders they have. Like we're talking, like IBM, like businesses like that type of a corporation. And it gets back to when they say corporate farm, we mean it's actually in Canada, it's actually a family farm that has made a business decision to become a corporation. So yes, we are incorporated, but we consider ourselves a family farm.
So you referred to the bigger farms that you were concerned about. Is there a difference in definition?
No, not that I know of.
Andre, if I may, I would just point to the 20.
Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
Sorry, I would just point to the 2016 census that kind of delineates between these series of situations, and it breaks it down as just under 52% are sole proprietorships. Partnerships are about just under 30. 22.5 are family, and 2.5 are non-family. So we'd be looking at that non-family section where they wouldn't. Andre would be a family corporation versus those that would be a larger stakeholder-owned enterprise that own land and utilize it. In the means that they want.
Mr. McLeod.
Okay, I have another question. For clarity, Mr. Harp pointed to the fact that if he sold his company to his children or his farm to his children, there could be, I think he said 100,000 or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of difference. A difference in if he sold to another entity. So, lots of money difference if he sold it to his children versus to selling it to an outside entity. Would this bill change that fact? Would this change how much money would be difference between selling to his family versus selling to a company or selling to somebody else?
So this bill
would you be able to give me an example of what that means?
And actually, I'd probably defer to somebody else for a clear example. But at the same time, this bill C208 would level it. So basically, the taxes would be the same as to a neighbor as versus one of my children.
Anybody want to bring more clarity to that point, Mr. Leslie or somebody, Mr. St. Roch? Go ahead.
Yes, I could.
If, for instance, and that comes back to the example I already cited, that is, the owner sold his shares to a foreign entity that is not related to the family. The example I mentioned is this. Let's say the sale price would be $1 million. Let's just say. The seller could claim a capital gain deduction. The amount would not be taxable. And that is currently what happens for farms sold to a non-related party or the small companies, as Mr. Kelly said. They sell the shares and they are entitled to a capital gains exemption. But if you sell the shares to a company that belongs to the children, this exemption no longer applies. And the difference becomes a taxable dividend. So that $1 million would represent up to $400,000 of tax payable to the seller. So it's not of interest to sell to one's child, because if the child has to pay the tax, or if it isn't the child, he would have to pay. He would pick up the money in the company. Another $400,000 would be withdrawn from the farm operation, whether it is the parent or whether it's the farm that pays the $400,000. But the money has to come from somewhere, and usually it is the farm that will be the funding source for that tax. Whereas if I am an unrelated party, a foreigner, there is no $400,000 that would not be due. So that is the difference.
Okay, we will have to end it there with this panel. The other panel is waiting just to. So I'd very much thank the witnesses for coming forward on this this important bill. Thank you very much for your testimony and answering our questions today. Just on your point, Pat Kelly, you brought up at the beginning. I know there's a lot of push to go to clause by clause, and we did pass the deadline for ourselves to propose amendments. But the letter just went out to independents this week, I believe yesterday, to independents, members of the House, if they want to propose amendments. And we really do need to hear from officials. I'm sensing strong support for the principle of this bill, but is there any unintended consequences? So we do need to hear from officials, and we need to get it done as fast as possible. I do understand there's the notices went out for Thursday's meeting. And in the third hour, we're dealing with COVID-19 spending and programs. And I understand there's a problem scheduling one of the departments in. We talked about this the other day, the in-camera meeting on the spending for COVID-19, the contracts, etc. But I understand there's one department that we're having trouble scheduling witnesses in from staff at the Department of Finance. But they can schedule them all in for March 30th. And we could do an hour in camera then and do C208 with officials and possibly get to clause by clause on Thursday in that hour if we wanted to make that trade. So think about that while we're dealing with the next panel, and not pop it on you right now without giving people the time to think about it. And we'll try and find some time last 10 minutes of the next panel to come back to this topic. Okay? So thank you again, folks. And Mr. Clerk, could we just test the next witnesses? We can suspend for a couple, or are they already tested?
I have 5 to test, so it would be best to suspend.
Okay, we'll suspend for 5 minutes, give people a washroom break. Thank you all. Suspended for 5 minutes. Standing Committee on Finance. The committee, as you know, as we're studying Bill C-208. So welcome to the witnesses on this panel. We appreciate you you coming on fairly short notice to this panel on an important private member's bill. We'll start with, we are going to go, just so panelists know, if the clerk hasn't told you, we're going to go till 6:30 Ottawa time. We extended by a half an hour. We're able to squeeze out the time. We will need to stop probably 5 minutes before that because we have to do a discussion as Finance Committee. Okay, we'll start with BDO Canada, Dustin Mansfield, Chartered Professional Counsel. Mr. Mansfield, if you're ready to roll, floor is yours.
Sure, you bet. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today regarding the transition of family business in Canada. My name is Dustin Mansfield. I'm a tax professional with BDO Canada from Boissevain, a vibrant rural farming community in southwestern Manitoba. BDO Canada is a leading professional services firm in the Canadian market, providing tax services to Canadian private businesses and the families and individuals owning these businesses. My father and uncle ran a successful small business in Manitoba for about 49 years, and my grandfathers and uncle were also farmers for many decades. My grandfather's farm was in our family for 96 years before it was successfully sold to longtime neighbors who are also successful multi-generational family farms. I take pride in my career that I can help people like my father, my uncle, or my grandfather transition their business to the next generation. I will start by saying that there are many provisions that are helpful in assisting the tax-efficient transfer of these businesses. Bill C-208 seeks to adjust two specific provisions that can create problems in transitioning ownership of family business to family members in a tax-efficient manner, often hampering the ability to allow a continuing success of the business now and into the future. The first section I will speak to is Section 55. It is a complicated set of rules that are aimed to prevent avoidance that might be achieved through converting of what would otherwise be a taxable capital gain to a tax-free intercorporate dividend. The proposed change is aimed at the fact that for Section 55, siblings are deemed to be unrelated for these purposes. It should be noted that they are still related for the other provisions of the Act at the same time. Because siblings are deemed to be unrelated, the ability to divide the business in a tax-efficient manner between them is extremely complicated and not always possible. The siblings must rely on what is called the pro rata butterfly exemption in paragraph 55(3)(b). This provision requires that when splitting up a corporation, each shareholder must receive an equal pro rata share of each of the cash or near cash, business, and investment properties of a corporation. The purpose of the provision is to prevent a shareholder from cashing out without paying tax, with the other shareholder continuing to carry on the business. Because they must take equal shares of each asset type, the company being split up, the provision prevents this. As a result of these requirements, Section 55 prevents a disguised sale of a business on a tax-deferred basis. However, problems arise when there are legitimate splitting of all asset types in a company between siblings, but the asset mix that is to be divided between them does not fit squarely within the extremely strict requirements of paragraph 55(3)(b). Bill C-208 proposes to allow siblings to be related for purposes of Sections 55, as they are for the other sections of the Income Tax Act, if the corporation split up among the siblings as a family farm corporation or qualified small business corporation. These are both defined terms in the Income Tax Act that require all or substantially all of the assets of the company to be active farming or business assets. Therefore, since passive assets could not make up more than 10% of the value of the business, the linking of the exemption to these statuses and the fact that the transaction would also have to follow the rules of the existing 55(3)(a), the integrity of Section 55 should be protected while allowing the business assets or farming assets of other small businesses to be split up more efficiently between siblings. There have been comments opposing the change that it may erode the tax base. The fact is, due to the punitive results of the rules in Section 55, you either have a division that qualifies and is done on a tax-deferred basis, or one that does not qualify and the transaction does not proceed. This is because the family has no liquidity to pay any of the taxes that would result on the transaction if it's fully taxable. If successful split cannot happen, what can happen is the business relationships between the siblings deteriorates, or it becomes difficult to transition the business to the next generation as the family tree grows. The second section of consideration is Section 84.1 that is most notably in place to prevent the use of one's lifetime capital gains exemption to extract a corporate surplus on a tax-free basis when there is a related corporation used in the acquisition of the shares of that corporation. In general, a parent can sell their shares of a corporate business to their child personally and use their capital gains exemption on the sale. To the extent the parent has available exemption, they can receive the proceeds tax-free, but the child must repay the purchase price with personal funds. To fund the purchase, a child would usually have to receive salaries or dividends from the business to pay the personal taxes and use the after-tax cash to pay their parent. Alternatively, a parent could sell the business to an unrelated party that is incorporated and claim the capital gains exemption with the same result as the previous example. The difference is that the unrelated party can use corporate funds to repay the purchase price, and corporate level funds are of course subject to lower taxes, leaving more funds to repay the exiting shareholder. In the end, the proposed changes to the legislation is to put a successor child of a business in the same shoes as an unrelated party on the transition of the business. That is why does a stranger result in better tax treatment than a child when the purpose is to keep businesses within family? In closing, the deemed unrelated provisions of Section 55 and the inability for a parent to utilize their capital gains exemption on a bona fide transfer of their business to the next generation are obstacles that hamper the transition of family businesses to the family members. The proposed changes are designed to add more flexibility to the tax rules and allow for easier transition in these circumstances. Thank you.
You're muted, Wayne.
Muted. Thank you very much, Mr. Mansfield, for explaining that in reasonable layman's terms. Tax policy is complicated. Turning then to Mr. Kelly, Canadian Federation Independent Business. I believe we just seen you last week. Go ahead, Dan.
You can't get enough of me, can you? So, and I'm sorry I missed you, Wayne, in our meeting with you yesterday.
No problem.
But look, Chair and committee members, pleasure to be with you back again. Really happy to present on this bill, a bill that CFIB strongly supports. As you can imagine, we are not tax policy experts in the way that an accounting firm would be, but certainly from a small business perspective, we have data to share that supports the spirit of this legislation. I want to make sure that I also say that while we're absolutely thrilled that Larry Maguire has put forward this bill, it's also built on the back of some earlier pieces of legislation from both the Liberal Party and from the NDP, and I think it was that all-party spirit that has got us so optimistic that perhaps finally we may see this move across the finish line. I remember Emmanuel Dubourg. I joined him a couple of years ago in a press conference when the Conservatives were in power, calling on the Tories to implement this legislation, and that didn't happen. And then I joined with the NDP a few years ago with Guy Caron to suggest the very same thing. That didn't happen yet either. Really hoping that third time's the charm here, and that we see Larry's bill get across the finish line. I did provide the committee with some data from CFIB, as you might expect, a little bit of data on succession plans for small business owners, of which this is an integral part. Please note that 72% on slide 3 of my deck, 72% of business owners told us that they were planning to exit their business within the next 10 years. That's a huge amount of small businesses that are expected to change hands in the next little while. And as the population ages, we know that the clock is running out. I will say that we're about next week going to release some brand new data from CFIB that looks at this from a COVID lens. We have a little bit of time here because about 43% of our members have told us that they are delaying their retirement as business owners due to the impact of COVID. Essentially, the value of their businesses has plummeted in many instances, and as a result, they feel like they may need to be involved in the business to try to get its value back up. About 5% of business owners have told us so far that COVID will cause them to speed up their retirement plans and exit their business, sell their business more quickly. But of course, we also know, and we've shared with the committee last week, that there are tens of thousands of businesses, 180,000 in fact, that are expected to fail before the end of this. And really, members of parliament, members of the committee, that's the part that I want you to remember. Canada needs these businesses to successfully transition from one generation to the next if we want the jobs, the economic development, the tax revenue that comes along with it. Most business owners are telling us that the reason they want to exit their business is retirement. 81% of our members tell us that. I remember one story that highlights this of one of our farm members. We visited a farm member who told us that the son told us that he was really, really happy that the dad finally shared with him the books of the business and was starting to talk about and prepare for succession. The son was 65. And his father in his 80s was now preparing him to take over the family farm. And I know some of this has to do with things over which government has little control, but there are pieces of this that government is in control of and can smooth to make sure that those business successions are as successful as possible. Many businesses, far too few businesses, operate with a proper formal succession plan. It is a concern for us, and tax policy does play a role in this. We really want to make sure that the barrier to transferring your business from a family member to the next is smooth, and Canada has an interest in this. I've spoken to thousands of business owners on succession planning over my 27 years with CFIB. One of the things I often hear, especially in rural Canada, is that they want to make sure that their kids take over the business because they have greater confidence their kids are going to keep the business as a going concern in that community, in that province, than if they were to sell the business to a third party. Business owners know, many of them, and there's nothing wrong with selling your business to a third party. That is the primary outcome, as our data suggests, that many businesses are looking at. But in doing that, if we encourage that, one of the things I worry about is that the companies that buy these businesses may be buying them for their assets, their product, or perhaps for their client list, and then are not worried about where the jobs are, where the headquarters is of that business. And so for all small business owners in agriculture and all other sectors of the small business population, we really do urge the committee to make this as smooth as possible. 78% of our members support the idea of ensuring that the transfer of a small business to the owner's children or grandchildren should be given the same tax treatment as the transfer to a third party. In conclusion, on capital gains in general, we urge the committee to change the Income Tax Act along the lines of what's being suggested in this bill. We'd love you to simplify and recommend further simplification of the LCGE, the lifetime capital gains exemption, to include some assets. And we'd also like to suggest that there's support for increasing the lifetime capital gains exemption to $1 million for all small businesses. It's already there for farms and fishers, but to have that extended to all business sectors would be a further recommendation from us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Turning then to the Conference for Advanced Life Underwriting, Cindy David, Chair of the Board, and Kevin Wark, Tax Advisor. I expect the floor is yours, Ms. David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to appear today. In addition to being an independent financial advisor located in Vancouver, I'm chair of the board for the Conference for Advanced Life Underwriters, or CALU for short. CALU and our partner organization Advocates represent approximately 13,000 insurance and financial advisors who in turn provide advice to millions of Canadians and small businesses across the country. We're of the opinion that Bill C-208 will have a positive impact for small business owners looking to transition their business to the next generation of family entrepreneurs. We've provided a brief to the committee that outlines the reasons why CALU believes it's critical to amend Section 84.1. I understand it's still in translation and you should be getting that by Friday. Our brief highlights how recent tax changes have made the application of these rules to family business transfers even more punitive since the provision was first introduced. In particular, I'll draw your attention once you get the brief to pages 4 and 5 that provide examples. Our brief also outlines various methods that the government could use to limit any potential tax abuses that might arise from relaxing the rules to sections 84.1. We believe there's some urgency around the need for the government to act in amending 84.1. I know that all committee members are aware of the importance of small businesses to the Canadian economy, but I'll highlight that the small businesses employ 70% of the private sector and have been major contributors to employment growth over the past decade. A vast majority of those businesses have less than 20 employees and play a significant role in supporting the economies of smaller communities across Canada. We believe a recovery from the current economic crisis will once again be led by the growth of small businesses. And it's not surprising that a number of owners now or nearing retirement age have been worn down by the stresses of the past year and are accelerating their plans to retire. Fortunately, many owners have working children in their businesses who have been groomed and are ready to assume control of the operations. However, we're finding Section 84.1 remains a major impediment to a successful transition to these businesses within the family. This provision either denies the capital gains exemption that has been spoken about quite a lot, but it can also alternatively force new family owners to assume potentially high levels of debt to pay off the purchase price, above and beyond what a third party would have to assume. Accordingly, business owners are often faced with a difficult decision to sell their businesses outside of the family in order to preserve more after-tax proceeds to fund their own retirement, or to receive less money from their children in order to pass on their businesses so that they can afford to pay the additional taxes that are currently required of them. We don't think it's fair. I've seen several examples of these impacts from my own personal experience with my clients. To address these issues, KLU is urging the committee to support moving forward with the intent of Bill C208. And we ask that you recommend that Section 84.1 be amended to permit the transfer of incorporated small businesses to the next generation of family owners on a more tax neutral basis. This clearly fits within the recommendation made as a part of your pre-budget report to the Department of Finance released in February. We strongly believe this action will facilitate the successful transfer of family businesses and in turn protect local jobs and local economies. Thank you for your time and attention. I'm pleased to respond to any questions that you have on this subject matter, along with our KLU tax advisor, Kevin Warwick, who is here with me today.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation, Ms. David. Then turning to Deloitte, Mr. Jansen, Senior Tax Manager. The floor is yours, Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, 84.1 has been a thorn in my side for 25, 30 years. I'm so pleased. I was pleased when I saw the Liberal bill in 2015 that did not get passed, and I'm just ecstatic to see what's transpiring so far. There was a brief example given in the earlier session, but I just want to quickly highlight in what would happen in Manitoba if with and without 84.1 on a sale to your kids versus sale to arm's length parties. If right now, if you got $1 million business, you sell your shares, this is not a farm, but a restaurant, let's say, you sell your shares to your neighbor, you're going to walk away with after-tax proceeds from $1 million sale of about $971,000. That's only $29,000 of leakage. If you turn around and actually, now just to, there's various ways to sell your shares to your kids under the current regime 84.1, but I'm just going to use worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is your kid sets up a holdco, buys your shares from yourself. That's going to cost you in Manitoba $466,000. because of the deemed dividend. That's a difference between the two scenarios of $437,000. That's just crazy. Now there's various other ways to reduce that difference, but there always is a difference when you sell the shares of a small business corp. I'm going to just concentrate on the small business corp during my discussion because we've talked a lot about farms. I understand why 84.1 was introduced. It was introduced to stop internal surplus stripping when there wasn't a real third-party sale or any kind of sale. That's totally understandable. But 84.1 went too far, and this proposed Bill C-208 really goes a ways to correcting that. A couple of other things, like we've said, it really encourages you to sell to a third party, not your kids. Like I've seen so many cases. I've got current clients now and even family members who are looking at sales, and they're pursuing the third party because it's too expensive to sell to their kids. So an American company or a multinational is more attractive than their kids, which we've heard from Kalu, from everybody. That is not the way to build a great economy. Another thing that, the first example I mentioned was where the person retained $970,000 on $1 million sale. Well, a lot of commentary has been said, well, that's a loophole, that shouldn't be, that why should they pay that little? Well, small business people should be treated differently, and farmers, because this person who sold their business for $1 million probably had no RSP or very little, because first of all, they probably took little salary out, so that's their retirement. And if they lose half it to the government, I don't lose half of my pension when I retire, so that's a very this is their RSP. So this is why it's so important to retain as much as they can. Just a couple of other quick comments. In the earlier session, there's commentary that corporations and holding companies are loopholes. Those are not loopholes. A corporation is mostly, like somebody was saying, required by the bank. Even in Manitoba, if you're a small business manufacturer, you need a corporation to take advantage of Manitoba's investment tax credits. So a corporation is not a loophole. And then the other thing I just want to reiterate as well is that, even after the sale, let's say, dad sells to the kids and, they paid more tax because of 84.1. Well, that kid is left also in a worse position on an ongoing basis, because he's now, depending on how they structured it, he's got to use his after-tax corporate profits to pay personal tax or pay dad off, as opposed to reinvesting. The guy that sold, the third party that bought from your neighbor, he gets to reinvest his 90 cents on the dollar. The guy that bought from his dad does not. So that puts him at a disadvantage on an ongoing basis as well. So this bill really is a great start. It's got some caps on value, which that's great. And this bill is helping the lower end of the small business community. This is not helping the huge rich companies, even if they're family owned. 84.1 is a drop in the bucket impact on them. This is helping the small guy, the small woman, the smaller families. So I really, sorry, I didn't think I needed to get technical because Dustin did a great job on that. So this is just my comments I like I say, I've worked with small businesses for 34 years. So this is a great help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jansen. With the insurance, last one on this panel, with the Insurance Brokers of Canada, Robin Young, President-elect, and Peter Braid, CEO.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Braid. Okay, go ahead. Floor is yours.
I'm hoping that you can hear me fine.
We gotcha.
Excellent. Thank you again, Mr. Chair. And please let me begin by thanking all committee members for their service to their constituents and communities during this past challenging year. I'm Peter Braid, the CEO of the Insurance Brokers Association of Canada, also known as IBAC. And joining me today is IBAC's President-elect Robin Young. Robin is also the President and CEO of Excel & Y, based in Calgary. We are here today to provide our support for Bill C-208 on behalf of IBAC's 11 member associations and 38,000 insurance brokers. Our member associations represent approximately 3,400 brokerage firms located in every riding across the country. Many committee members will know an insurance broker in their community and have likely met with them during our annual Hill Day. Insurance brokers work for their clients, not for insurance companies. They provide consumers with choice, advice, and advocacy while directly serving the best interests of their customers. Insurance brokerages make an important contribution to the Canadian economy. Member brokerages are primarily small enterprises that employ between 1 and 15 people. They contribute $5.4 billion to the national GDP and are responsible for over 58,000 full-time jobs. Many of these businesses are family-owned and operated. In provinces such as Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia, up to 25% of member brokerages are family-owned. In smaller provinces and more rural parts of Canada, this number is indeed much higher. In Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador, for example, the number of family-owned brokerages is 40% and 50% respectively. The changes proposed in Bill C-208 would have a direct benefit for brokerage owners who want to keep the business in the family. I will now turn it over to Robin. In addition to serving as IBAC's president-elect, Robin has experience purchasing and running a family-owned brokerage and will be able to speak to the importance of the intergenerational transfer of businesses. Robin.
Go ahead, Robin.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to the committee members for the invitation to speak today. I'm here to speak in support of Bill C-208 because of my experience purchasing the family business from my parents. When my parents decided to sell their business, they received an offer from a large direct writer. They ultimately chose to sell the business to me and my brother because it was important to them to keep the business they had built within the family. They also wanted to ensure that their clients would continue to receive the same expert advice and personal touch that they had come to expect. Family-run brokerages are the pillars of the community and the lifeblood of the economy. They serve and support their communities in good times and bad by creating employment and donating time, money, and other resources. Many third parties purchasing family businesses are large companies with no connection to the community. Rather than supporting local organizations and sports programs, they tend to sponsor professional teams and events. Personally, I sit on the board of a local children's charity, and our brokerage actively supports and volunteers for numerous community-based charities and children's sports teams. Bill C-208 will not only support the family succession of brokerage firms and ensure stability for customers, it will also help to maintain the social and economic contributions that the insurance brokers provide to their communities. In closing, this is an issue of equity and fairness. Business owners should not be penalized for selling their business to a family member. Tax implications should never be a consideration when making the decision to sell a business to a family member. We should make every effort to support and encourage the intergenerational transfer of these businesses. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much to you both. The question lineup is we'll start with Ms. Jansen and then on to Ms. Zerowitz, St. Marie, and Julian. Before you start, Ms. Jansen, I'll just take chairman's prerogative for a moment. Both Miss Jansen and other Miss Jansen spelled differently, or Mr. Jansen spelled differently, and Miss David. You talked about section 84.1, and we're working at a little bit of a disadvantage here, Miss David, in that because the submission isn't translated, we haven't seen it yet. But are you suggesting, you said there needs to be an amendment, are you suggesting there needs to be an amendment to 208, or is the amendment that's in 208 enough to cover your concern?
I'll pass the baton over to Kevin Work to answer your question.
Okay,
That's all right,
Kevin.
Mr. Easter?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you.
Perfect. We struck a committee in 2016 because of our members' concerns with Section 84.1. And we did recognize at the time that 84.1 was an anti-avoidance rule. It's there for a specific purpose. And if Finance was going to consider an amendment to that to allow an exception for family business transfers, they'd still need to be confident that the underlying purpose of 84.1 would be protected. And so we looked at it as fundamentally, we think there needs to be a change to 84.1, but we also think there needs to be some, I think it's been called guardrails by this committee, or some limitations put in place. So our submission is based on the work that was done 3 or 4 years ago, and making recommendations to Finance on how they could allow the exception, but eliminate any potentially abusive planning transactions that otherwise should be caught by 84.1. Bill C-208 has some of those guardrails in it already incorporated. We are supporting C-208 as it is, recognizing that Finance may have some concerns still with whether there's enough guardrails or not. And we assume that they could, at some point in time, if they feel it's appropriate, amend the provisions to implement those additional guardrails. But we're very concerned if C-208 doesn't proceed, that we'll be back here 3 years from now still debating this. So we would like to see this provision go. If it can be easily amended before it gets through, that's fine. But otherwise, we think Finance always has a prerogative to amend legislation once it's in place to correct any problems that it perceives exist.
Okay, so basically you're suggesting C-208 go as is, or and that Finance as soon as possible amend 84.1 to deal with the concerns that you have.
Well, it's not our concerns, it would be Finance's concerns.
Okay. Look, Finance is always concerned. Okay, Ms. Jensen, you're on.
Thank you so much. I have to say, small family businesses that this most impacts would be the ones least interested in having a discussion about this. You know, their eyes would roll back in their head when you start talking about surplus strippings and 84.1. So we need to get this right, because these are the people that are most impacted. And so if I can talk to Mr. Mansfield there, I'm trying to work myself into a way that I can understand this. You're saying that Section 55 currently makes siblings unrelated, like that there are not related people. And because of Section 55, assets need to be split between siblings. Now, I've heard of a story where, a printing shop, owned by a family, passing on to the kids, where the warehouse goes to the one sibling, and the printing machinery goes to the other, basically tearing the company apart. Could you tell me, is that actually how that works with Section 55?
Yes, thank you for the question. That is correct. So you can imagine the joy I get sitting in a boardroom telling two siblings that they are unrelated for purposes of splitting up the business. Number one, they sometimes question at that point whether they should be talking to me or somebody else on the matter. But yeah, for purposes of Section 55, siblings are deemed to be unrelated. Where there is a provision in one part of Section 55, which is one of the most probably complicated written sections in the Act. And it is a big challenge from that standpoint, specifically in our area here in southwestern Manitoba. I think I heard on the previous panel a lot of discussion about the growth of corporate farms. I remember the 2016 census. I think it grew 22%, up from 11% the previous 5 years in the census. And so what we're seeing now, though, is a lot of those farms that were started, my baby, a father and mother, are now with those siblings. And so you have 1, 2, 3 siblings operating a farm together. And you try to split that farm into two because, of course, the longer you leave it, the bigger that family tree grows and the more complicated and more dynamics enter the family relationships. Section 55, for purposes of following the provisions in 55.3b, which I've heard in arguments from the other side that they can still use that provision. It has a 1% tolerance on the asset types. So as you can imagine, these parties are unrelated for purposes of the section, but they're related for purposes of determining the value. So it becomes very complicated to actually make something fit in the rules.
Terribly complicated. And let me tell you, siblings definitely do not consider themselves unrelated when they've been working together in business. So then if you look at now section 84.1, I understand that in that section, then family members are related. And the reason why we make them related there is because we're so worried that family members are just trying to game the system. Can you share a story with us where a stranger couldn't afford, so a family sold to a stranger because they couldn't afford the tax hit by selling to their child?
Sure, it does definitely come up in play, and sometimes it's not even that the sale to the third party comes into what happens, but sometimes it creates awkwardness in the family dynamic. And the reason that is often individuals will come in assuming that their capital gains exemption is on the table. They've operated their business for 25 years, they've grown it up, they've heard about the capital gains exemption over their career, and they come in and they say, okay, I'm ready to sell to my child and realize my capital gains exemption and retire, to which case you tell them, well, if you sell to your children, you cannot. If the children are in the room at the same time, it creates an awkward situation, right? Because now you're pinning the family business and how it's treated to the mom and dad's exit from the business. Right. And so it can be in an actual situation, but also just create awkwardness in the dynamics of trying to do a proper transition.
So here we have section 55 where they're unrelated and section 84.1 where they are related. Does that explain the incoherence of this? This makes absolutely no sense. I mean, these small businesses are not trying to game the system. They're small businesses that have a huge impact on our communities. They're doing amazing things for our neighborhoods, and we're going to call them tax cheats. Is that the only purpose of this?
Well, I think the intent of the provisions that are in play are for anti-avoidance reasons. Obviously, there's many ways in all types of sections of the Act that anti-avoidance reasons exist. The Section 55 one is an interesting one. So Bill C-208 on it tries to tie it to the status of the shares themselves, which creates a protection in it from that level, which is positive. But you're exactly right. It creates an awkwardness when okay, you're unrelated for these purposes, but related for these purposes, and so it just becomes very confusing in an already confusing situation.
Right, and I understand if the transition is planned over many years, there are some workarounds, but with many small businesses, there's a sudden death or an injury or something that takes the parents out all of a sudden. Now what? What happens now?
Right. So I think in that type of a scenario, if mom and dad pass away and the kids decide to carry on the business, on their passing, they have a deemed disposition of their assets, right, at the last of mom and dad, depending on the will happens. If the capital gains exemption is claimed and they're passing, then those shares wouldn't be able to be transferred to a corporation, at least not to use that capital gains exempt value. And so therefore you're into the same scenario where you either have personal level debt, sometimes to pay out the other siblings, right? There'll be other siblings maybe in the state that aren't taking over the business. And so in any place it's always a very big area of concern for us as practitioners, but also as for clients of the trips of 84.1, because sometimes it's not even on the use of the exemption, but just the specific sale itself, as Brian alluded to earlier.
So 208 would just level the playing field, is what you're saying?
Bill C-208 would work to level the playing field in that situation.
Okay, we will have to move on. And I might say to the other witnesses, if you do have a point you want to raise in a question and it wasn't directed at you, just raise your hand and hopefully I will see you. Ms. Zerowitz, 6 minutes, followed by Mr. St. Marie.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to thank everyone for their excellent presentations. particularly you, Mr. Mansfield, I think this was the closest that I could actually understand in layperson's terms exactly what we're talking about today, even though you should know I am the daughter of a farmer, but I'm a downtown Torontonian born and bred, and so I cannot pretend that I know the workings of anything to do with transfers. I will tell you my bias. I really would love to find a way for these intergenerational transfers to happen in a fair and a more affordable way. So my questions are directed in terms of there must be some reason why this has come before the House of Commons as a private member's bill 3-4 times, but not passed. And I'd like to start trying to figure out how can we address some of those roadblocks. So Mr. Wark, I'm going to start with you and just continue along the lines of what the chair was asking you previously, where you had indicated that there was probably some concerns within finance in terms of guardrails and limitations. Do you have any specific recommendations about what additional guardrails we can put into place that might actually strengthen this bill and address finance considerations?
Well, I think one concern that has been raised is relating to future sales of the entity and whether it could revert back to the original owner. And there may be some structuring that could go on that would allow the company to move back in one form or another. And I think that's an area that could be looked at and I think could be easily fixed. And I think it could be done after the fact as much as before the fact. But I'm not sure how many of you recall, but when this bill was introduced by Guy Caron in 2016, 2017, when it was being debated in the House, projections were put forward that the cost of implementing this bill would be in the range of $1 billion. And I think that caused reflection by a number of members in terms of whether the bill should proceed or not. But the PBO's office came out afterwards and the number was significantly lower than that, and also assumed that the sale would not otherwise take place to an arm's length purchaser. They just said if all these businesses were ultimately sold to family members, here's kind of the tax loss. So I think we've come a long way in terms of understanding the impact of this bill, and also a long way in understanding the value of making this change. And I think the group here, I think all have the same perspective that there should be changes. It's a question of how to best affect it. And again, the concern we have is if this bill doesn't proceed, how much longer will it take for it to get back in front of this group again? And in the meantime, it creates significant uncertainty for small business owners doing their planning. And Dustin mentioned that it's not only dislocative to the sale process, but to the family. And we've heard similar stories where people are unaware when they start their planning and start to move the family business on to the next generation, that they cannot structure in a way that's tax effective. And it is very dislocative to the whole company, because all of a sudden the parents start needing to contemplate whether a sale should take place to a third party, which should not have to take place.
Well, thank you. Those, I think, are two important points. I didn't know if Mr. Mansfield or Mr. Jansen had something to add. Would you agree that those have been two sort of roadblocks in the past? And I think that I appreciate what you've indicated, Mr. Wark. Are there any other roadblocks or anything else you think that we should be identifying so that we could try to find a way to move forward? Anybody want to respond to that?
Sure, I can quickly respond there on that, and I did have my my mom and dad and my wife read the my statement to help with that part, as my wife tries to explain to me dentistry from time to time and I don't understand it either. So I think sort of to back up Kevin's comments, I think I've read between the lines on some of the comments from the party members in terms of, you know, can the parents sell the shares of the purchaser corporation back to the parents, because the provision currently includes a restriction of 5 years where the shares of the corporation itself are sold. But what I thought was quite interesting, and I do give a lot of credit to the individuals that went down the road with this bill, because interpreting and writing tax legislation is not easy. It does have a lot of guardrails that are there. I think what Mr. Wark has brought up are certainly some of the concerns I would assume finance would have, just in my experience in the career. However, I don't think they're impassable, right? I think they're pieces that could be added and quite make this thing work for purposes of use in practice.
Last question,
Thank
Julie.
you. Sure. And the last question is to Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly, in your recommendations, you have recommended to simplify the LCGE and expand it to include at least some of the assets and increase the LCGE amount to 1 million. Are you proposing that as additional changes to strengthen C208, or would you say, are you indicating that that's something that we should be considering moving forward?
You're muted, Dan.
Pardon me. I would not suggest that we delay this piece of legislation. I think to the points that were raised earlier by Mr. Wark, we need to see some movement on this. We've been waiting. We've been hoping that a government and opposition parties would align to make this happen, and perhaps this is our moment in a minority parliament to do just that. So I don't suggest that we delay it. Those are further recommendations, though, and things that we hear an awful lot from business owners. On the previous point that was raised, I will say I understand that officials in the Department of Finance have a difficult job to do. They need to make sure that they do not create scenarios for tax cheating, and that they do not that they are also fiscal stewards of the national treasury. But we've seen this movie before, and often in the Department of Finance, anything that is regarded as a tax expenditure, like specific measures to support small and medium-sized firms, they're met with a fair degree of skepticism, and so to discourage parliamentarians from moving on them, they often vastly overestimate the amount of potential revenue loss that will happen, and I suspect that's what's happening. That's what's happened in the past here.
Thank you so
much. Thank you. Thank you all. We'll turn to Mr. St. Marie, followed by Mr. Julian. And I'm not, yeah, he is there. And then Mr. Falk. Mr. St. Marie.
Oui, merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to inform you that for my second 2.5-minute turn, my colleague, Sébastien Lemay, will be replacing me for the second round of questions. And so I will ask my questions for this round. First of all, I would like to thank all of the witnesses for your presentations, for your answers. This is very useful and very edifying for us. However, I have to admit that I'm disappointed. Not vis-a-vis your presentations, far from it. But what I feel in this panel is the same thing as in the previous panel, which focused more on agriculture, but the fact that there is consensus. In other words, everybody's saying this needs to be done, it needs to be well done, we need to move forward, it's important. And that seems to be the point of view that everybody has shared, that this should have been completed for some time. And yet, if you look at the vote in the House at second reading on this bill, if I'm not mistaken, there were 146 MPs, 1 independent, 145 Liberals, who voted against at second reading. This is about the principle. So to say, yes, we are going to make the lives easier for families when there is an intra-family sale of a company to ensure the family succession, etc., but to say that, yes, we'll put them on the same footing as if the sale were to a third party, a foreigner, that alone, to say that we're against that principle, well, I can't believe that. And then I hear arguments that, yes, there might be a tax shortfall, but as was said, the budget parliamentary officer reminds us of the numbers that these are quite acceptable, specifically because we need equity. It shouldn't be less beneficial to sell your company to your family and to your children. So the remaining argument is this, and that has been raised up until now a number of times, is that we want to make sure that this bill does not create, we don't want it to create a loophole and to enable people to cheat on taxes. So we want to avoid people using this bill to pay less taxes. I'm an MP in Quebec. Quebec has undertaken that change, and we have the guardrails in place to ensure that this does not occur. So I'd like to hear your opinions on that. How to reassure the Liberal members who voted against this bill at the state of the principle that there are guardrails in place, that there are certain measures already in place to make sure that this will work and it will make life easier for a family succession. We could begin with Mr. Johnson, if that's acceptable to you, and Mr. Kelly perhaps could answer after him. Thank you.
Mr. Jansen?
Sure. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I do think the Bill C-208 does have enough of the guardrails to at least initially. Now, I'm going to preface this with saying, as someone who's practiced for 34 years, someone will always find something. So even if you think you have the proper guardrails now, you may have to tweak them later. And we're all in favor of that. So getting back to this particular thing, I really think the 5-year time frame, that if it's sold in the meantime, the mom and dad pay their taxes as they would have without this bill, that's a great provision. So there definitely are some guardrails there. Secondly, for the this just doesn't work to do an internal strip. The way Bill C-208 is set up. So the internal strip where you're taking out surplus without having a real sale, that's where all the abuse happened in the early 90s, which is why 84.1 was introduced. So this bill really also helps for that. And it's also the again, like I said, the threshold for the value, these are the smaller businesses. This is not going to be, all of a sudden, undertaken by rich families to try and take advantage of this. This is like I say, with the guardrails, between the value and the time frame, I think that's perfect for the beginning of the bill. If it does need to be tweaked later, so be it. But for now, that's a great limitation for any abuse in my mind.
And just coming in behind that, thank you so much for the question. I agree with your sentiment entirely. CFIB got involved in a little dust up in 2017 with the federal government over some small business tax changes that were being proposed. And we had just a tiny little argument with the previous finance minister about that very issue. And many of those the concerns behind that are similar to this. One of the things that the government doesn't do well, and I would not just talking about a political party here, but even the department, is reach out to the business community, to the accounting community, and talk about, okay, we're seeing some problems with this aspect of the Income Tax Act. What can we do to shore it up without creating massive dislocation and unintended consequences? That happens not often enough, and I got to tell you. And so I agree entirely with the previous comments that we should give this a try. If there is significant tax leakage, I believe that all the members that are presenting to you would be happy to talk to government, talk to the department about ways that we can tighten up the rules if somebody does find a creative way to try to abuse these particular provisions. Business associations, my own included, have no time or tolerance for that. We want to make sure that we have an effective tax system, and I'd encourage you to pass the legislation and then ask the department to amend as we go if there are problems that we see down the road.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Turning to Mr. Julian, followed by Mr. Falk. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks to all our witnesses for being here today, and we hope that you and your families continue to be safe and healthy during this pandemic. I'm going to start my first question to Mr. Jansen and Mr. Mansfield. Just so that we're clear, neither of you have identified any elements of this bill that show evident weaknesses. You are just showing due diligence by stating that if anybody is able to find a loophole in the bill, that we need to make sure that we review that and fix those loopholes. But you don't see any evident loopholes. Is that correct? And I'll start with Mr. Jansen on that.
That's correct. Because the bill is public knowledge or public available to the public, my group and I have gone through it. We've, if anything, we'd like to see it go a little further, but we always do. But no, we have not seen it. You know, as much as I say there is potential loopholes, we haven't seen any. With the you know, the two things I said earlier, that's a good those are good safeguards to make sure this is done as it's intended, just to allow for the succession of family businesses on a playing field that's level with others. So no, I don't see any potential loopholes at this point. That's that would be my point.
You're just being prudent in saying if ever there was, we need to be following up on that, and like any legislation, we need to make sure it's doing what it's intended to do. And given that this bill comes from Guy Caron, who was an NDP member of Parliament and brought it almost through, and now we have a sort of a second attempt. I think we've had the scrutiny both times.
Mm-hmm. Just one last comment is what can often happen, and has happened throughout the history of the Tax Act, is, you know, there might all of a sudden be another piece of legislation introduced with no real correlation to this section, but may inadvertently trigger a loophole. So that's what I'm saying, is that, you know, well, you got to keep monitoring this, but right now, and that can be done in the future, but right now I think this has really good safeguards.
Thank you. Mr. Mansfield, same question.
Yeah, so I think gone through the same analysis of the pieces that are added. It's always a little bit difficult from our standpoint until we see, you know, CRA's interpretation of how they would apply, or the minister would apply it, right? I think there's a few safeguards in there that I think would certainly help. You know, there's also one in there that talks about the taxpayer must provide the minister with an independent valuation. So therefore, there has to be an independent valuation of the business, and has to be provided to the minister. So based on this, how it would work, whether that's election form or otherwise, it's going to be provided to finance or to CRA in some regard, as well as an affidavit in their terms is signed by the taxpayer and a third party. And so I suppose when we talk about some of the abuse that come into play, depending on what that requirement looks like when it's enacted, you know, if you were asked to sign an affidavit with somebody that's legitimately selling a business versus not, I think that will create a fairly large check and balance in terms of something being submitted to the government in regards to that. So I think, as Brian said, there's always ways. I think if you look at legislation and it's in practice long enough, and as things change in dynamic, the ways can come into play where it could or could not be maybe misused. However, in something like this, you know, it always is up to how much that potential misuse would cost, and to whether there can be an additional provision added if the Department of Finance sees a potential in some transaction to do that.
Thank you. Now I'd like to move on to Mr. Kelly and Ms. Young and Ms. David. I asked the previous panel, and I'll ask you the same thing. Where you see, in terms of business transfer 15 years down the road, if we don't have this legislation, as opposed to having this legislation. And I mean this in terms of the impact of transfer of family businesses, impacts, financial impacts, all of those things. If you could look in a crystal ball and compare the two scenarios, one with the bill, one without it, what is the difference? And I'll start with Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Look, we have been talking about for a long time the tsunami of business transfers that are expected. I suppose the positive news is that a lot of business owners do get to kind of the age of normal retirement and then look at the business, look at the contributions they're making to society by keeping the business going, and then delay their retirement either because they love doing what they're doing, or they feel like they need to ensure that the business stays in that local community because of its contributions. And so we've had time, I think, before demographics really start to take hold, but we've run out of that time. And I think we do need to be prepared, because, you know, the clock is not getting kinder to us. At some point, these business owners are going to need to, or be forced to, exit their businesses. And at that stage, we have some we're moving into a tough environment And if we see the bleeding of our local communities, rural communities, neighborhoods in big cities, and see the bleeding of small, independently owned and operated businesses and replacement, as Robin was mentioning, with giant companies that own everything in the block, I'm not sure that that's the kind of Canada that all of us would love to live in. And I do think that we need to take this very, very seriously, and I'm hopeful that this legislation will make it across the finish line.
Who else wanted to answer that question? Was it Ms. David?
I'll chime in here. There's been a lot said about concerns about the unintended consequences of this legislation with regard to loopholes and large private corporations taking advantage of perhaps something that we hadn't intended. And I would point out that if we do nothing, we're riddled with unintended consequences. Because since this legislation was put in place, it's been in place for a number of decades. So you might wonder, why do we continue to push this forward? And it's because the way we've taxed small businesses has actually changed within the framework of this legislation. So the dividend tax has gone way up compared to what it was back in 1986, when this would first affect small businesses. And so if you, and again, I'll just point out, if you could write this down on a piece of paper, in our brief that you will get on Friday, on page 5, we provide specific examples so you can see how the tax has changed from 1986 to more current day. And it's become very punitive, and it's actually highlighted the fact that family businesses have a clear disadvantage today that they didn't have several decades ago under the exact same legislation that we have in place. And the other thing, the last I'll just leave on this is that Bill C-208 actually phases in a provision that disallows the exemption for the capital gains for larger companies. So it already takes care of any potential leniency toward large businesses, and really is in favor of smaller businesses who care more about using the capital gains exemption, I would say.
Okay, we will have to move on. We're considerably over time on that one. Turning to Mr. Falk, followed by Mr. Vragascatis. Ted?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for coming to committee today. You have brought a lot of clarity in your presentations and in your responses to the questions to what the bill is, what it will do, and your perspective of it. In my opinion, I think Bill C-208 is a bill that seeks to do one thing, and that's to address the inequity for small business owners, farmers, fishers that wish to sell their business or their enterprise to their family or to their children. And what it does is it allows them to use a small or the capital gains exemption, which they wouldn't be able to use currently, but they're able to use if they sell to a third party. So Mr. Jensen, you're from my home province of Manitoba. I'd like to ask you a few questions. You've indicated this has been a thorn in your side for 34 years. And that this is something that you've wished would have been addressed sooner. How often or how frequently do you encounter a situation where this would apply?
Without over-exaggeration, every day. It's 84.1. Actually, I'll just back up for a second. I don't think this has been said today, but 84.1 is the section of the Act that accountants get sued on more than any other section of the Act, because it's so wide, it's so prevalent, and it's not logical, and it's not fair. So a practitioner who doesn't have a tax group gets caught by this. So, but it's there all the time, because it doesn't just apply. So another example would be is if my client bought his company from his brother who inherited it from their grandfather, there's so much information that will affect the future taxation, and they may not have this information. Like if the brothers are not speaking, my client, brother 2, needs to know what brother 1 claimed on for his capital gain exemption. So to answer your question, 84.1 is so prevalent. It just applies in virtually all. It's always in the back of our mind for any private enterprise, whether or not they're going to sell to their family. It's just anytime we do a restructuring, it could inadvertently apply and trigger a dividend when you didn't think there would be one. So it's and this bill doesn't fix all that stuff, but it really fixes what it needs to start.
Okay, and I was going to ask that. Do you think Bill or the Section 84 that's addressed in Bill 28, whether it adequately addresses some of those issues that you're struggling with on a day-to-day basis?
It does.
Okay, and what are your thoughts on the guardrails that have been embedded into the bill, the 5-year period for resale of those shares?
I think that's fair. Like we say, those of us who have been advocating for the change to 84.1, don't want it to be abused, and we think the section needs to stay there for abuse, but these guardrails prevent that, and these guardrails make it apply to legitimate succession planning, legitimate transactions between parent and kids or grandparent and kids. So I think they're fair. Like I say, I would, it doesn't take long to get to a $10 million value, and that's where this phase-in starts to apply. So, if I had my druthers, I'd like to see that threshold be a bit larger, but I'm totally fine with this as a starting point.
Okay, and I was happy to hear in your presentation, you clearly explained that the way the bill is written, it is most advantageous to small business owners, and it doesn't provide an undue benefit to large corporations.
Correct. Yeah, partly because of the guardrails that you've got in this bill, but also because the larger companies. I've just gone through a couple here, and 84.1 and the capital gain exemption didn't even come into play. The numbers are big enough that that's just it doesn't apply. It's not a material to the larger private businesses. This is really helping the small private business.
This is for a situation where mom and pop who've been community builders their whole lives, they've been the ones that have sponsored the health foundations and the food banks and the sports clubs and the community centers, contributed all year long. They've got their nest egg for retirement stuck in their business, and now they're looking at a choice. Do I sell it to my kids and allow them to continue this rich legacy and give a lot of it away by tax, or do I sell it to Joe Blow down the street and end up with more cash in my pocket? And this bill seeks to address exactly that inequity.
Exactly. Yep. And again, the other thing we can't, just one last comment is keep in mind is, again, these people don't have tons of pensions or RSPs. This is their retirement.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both. Turning into Mr. Fragas-Scottis, 5 minutes, followed by Mr. Lemire.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. I'll begin with the CFIB if I could. Mr. Kelly, thanks for being here again this week. Great to get your insights. I'm pointing to you because I'm wondering if you have data. Is there any clear data that indicates the percentage of small business owners that would want to sell their business to their family, but cannot? Has CFIB accumulated any data along those lines, or?
I don't know that we've asked that specific nuance to the question, but in the deck that I shared with the clerk, which I believe was sent to you, on how business owners intend to exit their business, it's on page 5 of the deck if you have it. But the top answer in terms of to whom they might leave their business, 48% of businesses say that they plan to sell to buyers unrelated to their family. 25% said that they plan to sell to employees, which is another topic for another day, Finance Committee. 25% of businesses say they're looking to sell to family members, 21% to transfer to family members through an inheritance, and 15% wind down. This data was pre-pandemic. What it doesn't tell you, which is I think the nature of your question, is what would happen if the rules were different? Would some of those that are looking to sell to outside of their family choose to sell to the family? And would some of, would that cause some form of shift? Our suspicion is from the from the discussions we've had with business owners that yes, it would. We've talked to many business owners, and in fact, some of the people that some of the kids that say, it makes no financial sense for us to pass the business down from one generation to the next. That would be perhaps a smart decision for the future of the company, not a good decision for grandma and for mom and dad that are looking to retire. And I just want to underscore the other point. 80% of our members look to the value of their business to fund their retirement. They don't have huge numbers of RSPs or defined benefit pension plans. They're relying on the value of their business. And especially as we come out of COVID, that value is way lower for many of these business owners, and something we should all keep in mind as we look at this.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Work, if I could ask you, I think it was Ms. Zarowitz that talked about initially when she asked you the question, you pointed to the example of the possibility of an entity reverting back to the original owner. I wrote down your comment specifically. And you said in cases like that, hypotheticals like that possibility could be easily fixed. Your words. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, I think the guardrail you'd put in place is that the purchasing corporation acquires de facto and de jure control of the purchased corporation, so that the value and the control is in the purchasing corporation.
I want to ask you if I could, and I'd also like the thoughts of Mr. Jansen and Mr. Mansfield on this. There's been a criticism of C208, which I agree with in spirit, in principle. Of course, we would want to, as a finance committee, address unfairness. I say that especially as the son of a small business owner. But there has been a criticism along the lines of the lack of a requirement in the bill for a child to be involved in the transferred corporation's business, or for the parent to cease to be involved after the transfer. Any thoughts on how to address that gap in the legislation? I'll begin with you, Mr. Work, and if I could go to Mr. Jansen and wrap up with Mr. Mansfield.
Yeah, in the submission we've made to the Finance Committee, we talked about the consultation process that Finance undertook in 2017, and they commented on whether the business owner, after selling, should continue to be part of the business or not. And we engaged an outside consultant that was involved in consulting primarily on arm's length transactions of private businesses. And he indicated that in the majority of those situations, the owner of the selling owner was obligated to continue in the business because of the transfer of information and relationships. So to differentiate that from a family transfer doesn't seem to make sense. It would make more sense for the business owner to have some role to play longer term to ensure the business continues to be successful. So our view is that they should not necessarily control the business after the transfer, but they should continue to be able to play a significant role.
Mr. Jansen and Mr. Mansfield, if I could.
I would echo those comments because in many cases, the second generation wants the previous generation to stay involved in some form or another. Sometimes not at all, but often yes. And like I think it was Kevin was saying too, that in many cases, I've just gone through a few sales here in the last year, and in all cases, they wanted the arm's length previous COO to stay involved, the president, for at least for a year or two, just for on a consulting basis for his expertise, etc. So I don't think that should be a restriction. And secondly, with the
I don't mean to cut you off, Mr. Jansen, but there ought to, of course, be a requirement for the child, the purchaser, to be involved in the corporation's business. Which is, for my reading of the bill, which is lacking right now.
Yeah. So the first part, yeah. The second part, yes, I agree with that. But there's also there's no requirement when you're selling to a third party that third party has every right to have managers run his business. So if dad is selling to son, and son decides to have wants to stay involved, obviously he's got to stay involved at some, but in some point or some manner, but maybe not day to day, and he hires people, a COO to run it. That's fair. That happens, and that should not be penalized either. The son is still going to be ultimately involved in the business, maybe not day to day.
Thank you.
Okay, I know. Did you have anything you want to add? We're a little over time, Mr. Mansfield, on that as well. I think.
Well, for overtime, by all means, you can certainly move on.
Okay.
I can add a couple of things, I guess.
Yeah,
maybe
you might as well. Go ahead.
Sure. So for the first one, I would agree that in the non-arm's length and arm's length environment, thinking of that to a third party, there's no requirement that individual be active. I think to a comment and thinking out down your lines, if a parent was still active in the business and the child was not active in the business, then they would fall afoul on certain rules such as tax on split income, et cetera. So there's various other provisions that would come into play in situations like that as well.
Okay, thank you all, Mr. Lemire, followed by Mr. Jolien. Sebastian.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me well? Thank you. An article in the Journal of Montreal, March 30th, 2017, that is when we had the other debate with C-267, introduced by Mr. Caron. And I'd like to add this to the debate because the referral to the bill introduced by the Liberals. And that goes back to 2016. C-275 had the same objective. So in this newspaper article, they're saying that the Liberals are against this. At the time, they said that they were against because they feared that the implementation would lead to costs of between $1.2 to $2 billion. And the budget officer estimated that this cost would be between $163 and $273 million per year. So far less than what the government, Trudeau's government, had put forward for this bill. So my question is addressed first to Mr. Kelly. Do you believe that these numbers remain realistic? How much do you think this kind of measure would cost, and which companies would benefit from it the most?
I don't have data on the exact cost of this particular bill, but what I can tell you is just to echo the concerns that had been shared earlier about the estimates that the department put forward. So they did seem, some of the assumptions that they made seemed crazy. They made assumptions that this would be used by virtually everyone, and we've seen this, of course, during pandemic programming. Where government departments federally and provincially have estimated, well, if every single business owner ever in the history of mankind used this provision, here's what it would cost. And of course, that never happens. But it's meant to scare legislators away from these kinds of from considering these kinds of measures. And again, I know they have a job to do. I know they take it seriously, but sometimes the results of that cannot be taken seriously when you poke a few holes in them.
Donc, je comprends que c'est une forme.
So I understand, and it's a scarecrow measure being used by the Trudeau government. Mr. Mansfield, what do you think about that?
Off mute. I think in terms of coming to the pure cost of any measure, I probably don't have the ability to do that, and I don't have the experience in that area. I think I've heard from a lot of members today as well in previous sessions that all seem to be in line with the spirit of what this is trying to accomplish. And so I think in my mind, in dealing with anything, you always focus on the spirit and work out those small details that need to be to push it past the finish line. And that's what I'm hearing most of today.
Okay, thank you. Then, well, Mr. Jolien.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go to Ms. Young because I'd asked the question in the last round and she didn't get a chance to respond. That was the question of looking in the crystal ball over the next 15 years with the bill and without the bill?
Sure. I think we're already seeing it happen, particularly in this last couple of years. We're seeing a lot of large consolidation of small brokerages that are selling to large, as I mentioned in my comments, to large corporations owned, either backed by private equity firms or backed by insurance carriers or whatnot. And so we're already seeing it. We have a large number of brokers that are 3,400 brokers in brokerages in Canada that are primarily have less than 15 employees, and they have to make a choice to sell to a large corporation with deep pockets or to pass along to their family that is working alongside them in the business. And if the playing field isn't equal, then they're going to make the best decision for their retirement.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to Mr. Kelly. Two things. First off, the estimated cost of this is a fraction of the amount of money that the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer tells us we lose to overseas tax havens. Every year, we lose $25 billion at least in tax revenues to overseas tax havens. So the amount that is estimated by the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer around 275 million annually is a pittance. So my first question, of course, is the benefits far outweigh the small level of cost. But if anybody's concerned about tax leakage, overseas tax havens should be the first priority. That would be my question to you. And then my second question is, are you familiar, because you've got international links, with any other country that actually penalizes in the tax system people from transferring their family business or their family farms to their children?
Yes, thank you for those questions. Agree with you that there are better spots for us to pursue additional government revenue if that were the objective here. Look, the lens that I think we would encourage you to look at first and foremost is to do what's fair. If groups like mine were coming to you and say, okay, let's put an advantage in place to sell to an international company or to an arm's length party, I think you would rightly laugh us out of the room. If we were saying, let's create a huge advantage to sell to your kids, you might say, well, wait a minute, is that fair? Government should be neutral here. And ensure that the tax treatment of the sale of a business, whether it's to one's family or whether it's to a third party, is the same. And that is, my understanding is that is how it works in the rest of the world, is that the tax policy should not speak to whom we should add advantage in the sale of a business. We should make it a level playing field regardless, and then let the market, let business owners sort out to whom is the best party to take over the businesses. And honestly, if we were to incent something, I think it's in the national interest to incent the transfer of the business to the kids for all the reasons we've talked about, including keeping those businesses as going concerns in the communities that depend on them for jobs and employment.
Okay, thank you all. We'll go to Mr. Kelly, and Mr. McLeod will have to wrap up this panel because we do need 5 minutes at the end, and we got a hard stop at 6:29.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. And if I could perhaps just again, maybe go to Mr. Jansen on this, because he mentioned this before, but I really want to make sure that this is clearly understood, that to the critics of this bill, or those that seem to have the greatest concern about its consequences, that this bill does not convey a tax advantage to businesses that operate through a limited company, transferring between the generations. This bill removes a disadvantage to those businesses. Is that about as fine a point as we can put on it?
Absolutely. Yeah, just getting back to Daniel's comments as well. All this is doing is leveling the playing field, and not even fully yet, but it's a great start. But you're right, there is no advantage. Let's say this bill passes as is. there's still no advantage. Someone selling their business to their kid will not be at an advantage over somebody selling their business to a third party.
Exactly. We're merely taking away
some of the disadvantage.
One of many disadvantages that a person has when they choose a life of self-employment. It's a very difficult thing to run your own business, and the risks to one's family's financial security are enormous. Perhaps, well, they're unlimited, really. But I'll maybe keep this going because I know the time is short, and switch to maybe to Ms. David or both Ms. David and the insurance brokers. We've heard a lot about in our testimony about the impact on farms, a little bit on fishers, and a bit about other, I've listed, restaurants and small manufacturers and things like that, but professional service providers, all thousands of them have limited companies too, and have build up a business that they would want to transfer to the next generation. So could you maybe comment on how common limited companies are among in financial service providers?
Well, we're actually a great industry to reflect that, because aside from other diversity issues, we've got an aging demographic problem in financial services, in particularly insurance. And we see many of our retiring advisors selling their practices to their children, probably overweight to the family side. So I think you don't have to look very far to find small businesses in multiple jurisdictions, different labor markets that are affected by this.
Anything from the insurance brokers to add?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kelly, for the question. It's a great question, and the demographics of the broker channel are very similar to the demographics across the small business community. We've got a number of businesses, a number of business owners that are at the stage, or will soon be at the stage of considering a business transfer. This bill provides a wonderful opportunity to level the playing field, to ensure that the significant number of insurance brokerages that are family owned across the country can consider the sale within the context of their family. So we think that this is absolutely critical. And I know that Robin may have some of her own personal experience to share as well.
Robin?
Sure. I mean, as a second generation broker, it's tough to take over, it was tough to convince my parents to even want to sell to us for a multitude of reasons. Primarily because they could sell to third party for a significantly more money. But ultimately, as I said in my opening remarks, they wanted to continue that and continue to support the community that they built their business in.
Yeah, and I guess this it would goes without saying this would be the same for real estate practices, mortgage brokers, which is my background, but medical professionals, law, accounting, any of a variety of these types of businesses. So with that, Wayne, I'll turn it back over and.
All right, thanks, Pat. Mr. McLeod, you get the last shot at this panel.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. Bill C-28 was brought in by Larry McGuire, Conservative member. He's made a lot of good arguments in this presentation. We hear a lot of people supporting this, and it seems like a logical thing to have families being able to transfer their businesses to their children. I know the last time it was raised in 2017, there was lots of issues that hadn't been resolved. But I hear from a lot of people that have been working on this for quite some time. It looks like it's been a thorn in the side for many people on this panel. I just wanted to ask, why didn't it happen when the Conservatives were in power? It's something that they're now bringing forward, but Why didn't it happen? What stopped it before? Maybe Dan or Brian.
Dan's been around as long as I have, so Dan, it's up to you.
Sure. Look, the same finance officials that hate this idea now hated this idea then, and advised government not to go down this road. The Tories did at least review the legislation, and to their credit, but didn't pass it. When the Liberal MP Emmanuel Dubourg proposed this years ago, and Emmanuel will remind you, prior to becoming a parliamentarian, was a CRA auditor, so knows what he's talking about. So look, it's inaction and prioritization that I think was the enemy of this. This is a confusing area, and no minister wants to be the one that presides over something that is going to create some giant new loophole that costs the Treasury a bunch of cash. This isn't that bill. This is a bill that I think has put in place reasonable guardrails. The Liberals, Emmanuel Dubourg tried to do that. Guy Caron tried to do that. And I think Larry Maguire is doing the same thing, trying to make sure that we find that balance to ensure that we can provide legislation to level the playing field without necessarily leaving a giant new way for creative people to try to get out of their tax obligations. And I think that this bill does that. I really, really urge the committee to give this your strong endorsement so that we can get this issue behind us. If there are tweaks that are needed, call us all back. I guarantee you the accounting community, business or associations like mine and others will be there to find ways to shore up any gaps that we may encounter along the way. And you have my word to do that.
I can perhaps jump in on that one as well. Of course, private members' bills will fail or succeed for a whole range of reasons historically. But again, I think parliamentarians have a unique opportunity to seize the moment today. I think there's a greater element of political will around this particular bill, Bill C-208, and the circumstances are different. The backdrop of our circumstances, as you all well know and can appreciate, we've been through a year of a global pandemic. And the demographics of the small business community has also changed. So that the time is now.
Mr. Chairman, I got one more quick question. I just wanted to hear from everybody quickly that they all agree that this is going to reverse the trend that's been happening for some time, where farms are being sold to large corporations. We're now going to see farms being sold to families, businesses sold to families, and things will stay on businesses that grandparents worked so hard to build up.
Well, as an advisor on the front, I'll address that. Thank you for the question, Mr. McLeod. I, as an advisor on the front lines, having these conversations with business owners who are looking to retire, you hit the nail on the head. Tax dictates behavior. So if it causes me tax pain to sell my business to my child, I'm going to look to avoid that pain. So if we fix that, then it'll result in the correct behavior.
It'll not solve all the problems, but it will help. I think is what you're saying, Ms. David. Anybody else want to add a final comment before we release the witnesses? Okay, thank you. I want to sincerely thank all the witnesses. I think we had a very informative discussion. I think all of you, your experience in terms of your personal experience in terms of dealing with individuals on intergenerational transfers, whether it's farms or small business or fishers, certainly showed through on your knowledge during this discussion. So I want to thank each and every one of you for that on behalf of the committee. To the committee, I suggested there earlier that we probably have an option on Thursday if we want to continue on with this bill and move the COVID the in-camera meeting on COVID expenses to March 30th, so we have the full slate of it. And I'm not sure which department we're short, but I know we're short one. So if you prefer, we can we have Freeland on for the first hour, Minister Freeland. Then we have officials. That's on C14. We could take the third hour and deal with with this bill C208. Have officials there and the legislative clerk, and see if we could finish up on C208 and move the other in-camera session to the 30th. Are we okay with doing that? Just give me some directions. I see people's heads shaking. Okay, then we'll move the in-camera meeting to the 30th. We'll go with C208 on Thursday during the third hour. Okay, I know we're in a little bit of trouble with the head clerk, I guess, for taking the extra half hour, but that's okay. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you, committee members. Meeting adjourned.
Good night. Thanks.